Chapter 531. Before the Mid-Autumn Festival, Yongning and the Tsundra Lolita were taken into the palace. Today was the second day after the Mid-Autumn Festival, and Yongning should be sent back in 2 days. Since the beginning of autumn, the weather has gradually become cooler. The unbearable summer heat has gradually faded away. In the capital, the smoothie shops and ice-making workshops have gradually closed, but the sales of Rui's dew are as hot as ever. According to the experience of last year, this kind of popularity will continue for at least 3 months, and will gradually decline after the first snow falls. Li Yi was lying on the rocking chair in the courtyard with his eyes closed. Xiao Huan stood behind him, and a pair of skillful hands pressed on his head skillfully. Knowing that her son-in-law was thinking about something, this time she didn't chatter in Li Yi's ear, which was rare. Li Yi was indeed thinking about something, and it was a very troublesome thing. Rui's mood has been a little depressed in recent days. He thought it was a normal reaction during a special period, and tried all kinds of methods but failed to change it. It was not until 2 days ago that he found the crux of the matter. It has been a few months since the two of them consummated their marriage. Under normal circumstances, there should be no movement in her stomach. This is what she cares about. This is also what Li Yi is worried about. Could it be that in the process of transmigration, some unknown changes occurred in some places, leading to the current situation? He even went to the Imperial Physician's Bureau to find Lu Jimin. Although old Lu's diagnosis was that there was no problem, it did not make him feel at ease. After all, if there was really something wrong because of the different body and soul, it was not something that could be seen just by feeling the pulse. Of course, the problem may also lie with Rui. After all, this matter seems to have nothing to do with the level of martial arts. But considering the pressure in her heart, Li Yi did not say anything or do anything, and tried to avoid this topic these 2 days. Since ancient times, people would blame this kind of thing on women, even they themselves thought so. No wonder Rui wanted him to marry Miss Zheng. This has probably become a knot in her heart that can't be untied. Forget it, stop rubbing. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became. Li Yi patted Xiao Huan's hand and said, "Oh." The young maidservant behind her responded in a low voice. She had a worried expression on her face. The son-in-law had encountered some trouble, and the young miss didn't seem to be very happy either. How good would it be if she could help the son-in-law? The sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Xiao Huan raised her head and saw the princess who often came to the house walking in. She could see princesses every day and more than one of them. She was already immune to princesses. Xiao Huan, brew a cup of tea. Li casually stretched out his hand as a greeting and said, "Sit anywhere." The maidservant looked around. There wasn't even a chair here. Did the son-in-law want the princess to sit on the floor? "Guild leader, you shouldn't be so free lately, right?" Li Yi asked lazily as he looked at the princess. Emingzi didn't sit down. She looked at him and said, "The specific things are naturally done by the subordinates. I'm not that busy." Li Yi sat up from the chair and looked at her. How could she not be busy? The women's union didn't bring all the women together to hold a party every day to discuss which perfume smelled better or which brassiere was more stylish. They clearly could do more things. Emingzi looked at him and asked, "When the women of the noble families in the capital unite, they can indeed do some practical things for more women. How did you think of it?" Li Yi stood up from the chair and said, "What do you mean, how did I think of it? The women's union is the crystallization of the wisdom of the women in the capital. What does it have to do with me?" The princess nodded and said, "I always feel that the women's union can do more than help the court implement the law of delaying the age of marriage for women. What do you think?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I don't understand the matters of you women, say a few words." Emingzi looked at him and said, "Delaying the age of marriage for women and standardizing the midwifery procedures were all proposed by you. I really don't understand, say it." Li Yi hesitated for a moment and said, "Then I'll simply say a few words." "I'm all ears," the princess said as she sat in the chair that Li Yi had just sat in. This women's union, of course, has more than just that. Women are of low status and are often bullied. In this case, even the government sometimes doesn't give them justice according to the law. Your women's union can act as an umbrella for these women. While standardizing the law, you can also return a clear sky to the capital. After the implementation of the new marriage law, it will make the lives of many poor families in the capital more difficult. You can provide these women who have reached the age of 13 with jobs that they can do. For example, embroidery, printing and dyeing, perfume workshop, soap workshop. These jobs are actually suitable for women so that they can support themselves and even the whole family. Open up a female school, pick out some talented women and focus on training them. For example, female doctors, female accountants, female shopkeepers, female spies, female assassins, and so on. Our business will grow bigger and bigger in the future, so we can't do without these. Female spies, female assassins? Emingzi looked at him in surprise. What does this have to do with business? This is not important. Li Yi waved his hand and said, embroidery, printing, and weaving are more important. Let Li Xian improve the loom and also improve the recipe of dyes. Don't make cloth, make clothes. Forget it, you don't need to worry about this. I'll arrange it. Women's school, you have to pay enough attention to it. Don't teach women's commandments, don't read women's biography, learn management, learn technology. 2 hours later, Li Yi drank the tea that Xiao Huan brought over in one gulp and said, I'll just say a few words. Do you remember? Emingzi nodded, then shook her head and said, to do so many things, I'm afraid it will cost a lot of money. The national treasury is already tight, they won't use the extra money on these things. The imperial court? Li Yi curled his lips. If the imperial court wanted to interfere, he wouldn't agree to it. Li Yi looked at the princess and asked, are you short of money? Is Li Xian short of money? I'm short of money, I'm short of money. Emingzi thought for a while, then shook her head and said, not short of money. Li Yi asked again, since we are not short of money, why do we need to ask the imperial court? Does this matter have anything to do with the imperial court? Emingzi thought for a while but still didn't understand what he meant. Why don't you say a few more words? Li Yi sighed and said, then I'll say a few more words. 2 hours later, the princess stood up and looked at Li Yi and said, I understand. Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief and patted her shoulder. With an extremely serious expression, he said, good luck, I believe in you. Chapter 532. Something is not quite right. Before the princess left, she suddenly turned around and looked at Li Yi with bright eyes. Just now he had said a few more words. Li Yi was very thirsty. He held a pot of tea and gulped it down. Hearing this, he put down the teapot and asked, what is wrong? The princess showed a thoughtful expression and said, you usually avoid trouble when you can, and you don't say a word more if you can. Why are you so attentive this time? There must be something wrong. Looking at Mingzhu's slightly suspicious eyes, Li Yi wanted to throw the teapot in his hand at her. *Sike. I just said a few more words. What's wrong? Do you think I have any ulterior motives? If you were the first prince instead of the eldest princess, I wouldn't have to do these things and say these words. I have nothing better to do. At the risk of being checked by the court, I helped to implement the new marriage law, and I stayed up late to write the script. I even had a few pimples on my face. I also had to hire the internet water army to fan the flames and create public opinion. It was not easy for me to do all this. It was good to sell perfume and underwear. Why would I care about the happiness of the women in the world? Whether their thoughts were independent or not, and whether their consciousness of struggle was awakened. What a heartless fellow. Why didn't she take a look at who was the one getting the benefits? All she did was casually show her blade in the imperial court and earned her reputation and money. When the two ideas he had just said became reality, who knew what she would get? Now, she was actually suspecting that he had ulterior motives? Without him, she would still be grounded. Xiao Huan, see the guest out. Li Yi lay back on the chair and was extremely disappointed. He didn't look at her again and ordered the little maid. The little maid looked ahead blankly. That was the princess. How could he see her out? Emingzi wants to open a girls' school? Emperor Jing turned his head and looked. He shook his head and said, according to what the empress said, the scale of this girls' school is really rare in the world. It can be called another directorate. The national treasury has always been tight, but there is no extra money for her to toss about. Although women's schools were rare among the common people, they were indispensable to those scholarly families and aristocratic families. The girls in the family had to enter the women's school at an early age. Aside from learning the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy and painting as well as poetry and classics, they also had to learn the women's reflections and women's training, which were related to women's virtues, women's duties, and the etiquette of the boudoir. He was not surprised that Emingzi wanted to do something for women these days and wanted to open a girls' school. However, if they followed her plan, it would cost a lot of money. The national treasury was already tight, so it was impossible to use the money on these things. The empress put a bowl of soup on the table in front of Emperor Jing and said, Your Majesty guessed wrong this time. Emingzi did not want to take money from the national treasury. Emperor Jing asked doubtfully, without an investment of 100,000 taels of silver, I'm afraid it will be difficult to succeed. Where will she get the money? The empress smiled and said, Your Majesty, Do you know what is the most profitable business in Jingdo? Jing Emperor drank a mouthful of soup and turned to look at her. He had to deal with countless government affairs every day. How could he have the energy to care about these things? It's perfume. The empress looked at him and said, in the palace, from the concubines to the palace maids, even the little princesses use perfume. It is very popular outside the palace. Every time a new product is released, it will set off a wave in the circle of the noble ladies in the city. Your Majesty, do you know how much this inch-tall bottle of perfume sells for? Emperor Jing shook his head. Li Yi said that he could not smell perfume, so the palace maids around him were not allowed to use it. The empress never used it, so he was not very clear about this. 10 taels of silver. The empress shook her head and looked at him. One bottle is 10 taels of silver. Even so, there are still countless people scrambling for it. What's more, perfume is only one of the industries under Mingzhu's name. The profits of soap and liquor are not inferior to perfume. To be honest, I do not know how much wealth Mingzhu has now. Emperor Jing was surprised and said, these things have such a big profit. In just half a year she can easily take out 100,000 taels of silver? 100,000 taels of silver was not a small amount. It should be known that the annual tax revenue of the Jing kingdom was only 10 million strings of silver. In the past 2 years there had been disasters. Last year's tax revenue was only 8 million strings of silver. It was incredible that Mingzhu alone had a wealth of 100,000 or more in such a short period of time. This is all thanks to your Majesty's County Earl Li. The Empress smiled and said, not only Mingzhu but Xianer has also earned a lot of money in the past 6 months. I have received their filial piety these days. My hands are tired. He did not want to be a good county earl, but learned to do those profit-seeking things like a businessman. Emperor Jing shook his head and asked, what has Li Yi been doing these days? Changda's figure appeared behind him and said, your Majesty, County Earl Li has been playing around with the 2 princesses these days. What else? Seeing that Changda did not speak again after saying one sentence, Emperor Jing looked back and asked after a while. Your Majesty, nothing else. Changda shook his head and said. Emperor Jing was stunned and asked, he only plays with Yongning Shaning every day? Changda nodded and said, County Earl Li said that this is to let Princess Yongning relax and help her illness. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said helplessly, I don't know where he learned his medical skills. Although it seems absurd, it is effective. Forget it? Changda thought for a while and said, County Earl Li also said that because His Majesty summoned Princess Yongning to the palace twice and interrupted the treatment, she needs another 10 days of treatment. Treatment? Emperor Jing frowned and asked, what do you mean? It means that because His Majesty summoned the princess to the palace for 3 days, the princess needs to stay in County Earl Li's mansion for another 10 days. Changda said. Nonsense. Emperor Jing slammed the table and said, a monarch does not joke. I said 2 months, so it is 2 months. Not a day more, not a day less. You actually blame me for summoning Yongning into the palace? What? Can't I see my own daughter? Changda sighed and said, County Earl Li said that the last 10 days are very important. If something goes wrong, I am afraid that all the previous efforts will be wasted. Her Royal Highness may become like before. Hearing this, Emperor Jing's body shook slightly. How could he forget that stupid expression and empty eyes? After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, 10 days, forget it. 10 days is 10 days. Thinking of another thing, Emperor Jing suddenly asked, where did Shaning go? Why haven't I seen her these days? Changda pondered for a moment and said, didn't His Majesty order that Princess Shaning can go out of the palace these days? Only then did Emperor Jing remember that Shoning had thrown a tantrum and threatened to go on a hunger strike. He had a headache before he agreed. In these 2 months he could go out of the palace to see Yongning. Did she go every day? After a while, an angry voice came from the Hall of Diligent Government. Is it not enough to kidnap my daughter? Do you want to kidnap another one? Chapter 533. Yongning's condition is more urgent. Should we add a few more courses of treatment? Li thought about it carefully and felt that the old emperor wouldn't agree. According to the information he got from Changda, it might be a big risk if he pushed it further. Forget it, it's better not to take this risk. After fooling around for 10 more days, there was still half a month left to squander. Yongning didn't realize at all that she would return to the palace in half a month. She ran in the yard, picked up the paper planes that had flown out, and let out a crisp laughter. Xiao Cui and Xiao Zhu were very depressed because the distance the two of them flew with their paper planes was not as far as Yongning, not to mention that she was still a little girl. This made the two big sisters suffer quite a blow. Li glanced at them. It would be a miracle if they could fly past Yongning. He had found the method of folding paper airplanes from a book called Advanced Paper Airplanes Encyclopedia. He had accidentally glanced at it and saw it as Advanced Paper Airplanes Encyclopedia. He had wondered how such a book could be placed in the provincial library. Airplanes were also divided into high and low levels, and did it need to be taught? This is the account for the past half a month. Have a look. Zheng Zumo threw a thick account book in front of him. Yes, he was now at Zheng Zumo's place again. Of course, it wasn't because he wanted to marry Miss Zheng and have children. It was because Yongning insisted on pestering him to come over every time. In the past few days he had heard little bunnies be good, flying bugs, and where is spring? To be honest, seeing Yongning and Miss Zheng being so close, he actually felt a kind of sour feeling in his heart. So what if she was beautiful and sang well? Li Yi tore 2 pieces of paper from the back of the account book and folded 2 paper planes. However, because the paper was too thin, they didn't fly very far. He was too lazy to do such a boring thing as looking at the account book. He reached out to grab a handful of melon seeds and asked casually, "Where is Ruoqing?" Seeing that half of the seeds in front of her were gone, Zheng Zumo silently moved the bag of seeds closer to her and said, "He went to the underwear store and will be back at night." Since yesterday, Yongning had said that she wanted to eat osmanthus cake several times. In fact, Li also wanted to eat it. With the same ingredients and the same method, the taste of the cake he made was far from the one made by Wan Ruoqing. Li always suspected that she had some ancestral secret that she didn't tell him. While looking at the latest lingerie illustration designed by Zheng Zumo, he was munching on melon seeds. Although the style was still a little conservative, it had a unique flavor. No wonder those men couldn't hold themselves back when they saw it. Li looked at the album and then looked at Zheng Zumo. He imagined a certain scene and felt that he wouldn't be able to hold himself back if it were him. "Why are you looking at me?" Zheng Zumo subconsciously hid back. She always felt that Li Yi's eyes could see through her clothes and see the purple underwear she was wearing today. It was an indescribable strange feeling. "I won't lose a piece of flesh just by looking," Li Yi said and rubbed his nose. Fortunately, it wasn't bleeding, but he didn't dare to look again. Once you started eating melon seeds, you couldn't stop. Li Yi finished the one in his hand. When he reached out again, he found that Zheng Zumo was holding the bag in her hand and looking at him angrily. She looked at Li Yi and said, "That's all there is left." Li Yi curled his lips. "Tisk, it's just melon seeds and it's even the original flavor. It's as rare as anything." If he told her that melon seeds had 5-spice, cream, jujube and cucumber flavor, wouldn't this woman go crazy? If it was in the future, he wouldn't want such disgusting melon seeds even if they were given to him. "Look, what's that?" Li Yi inadvertently glanced behind Zheng Zumo and suddenly widened his eyes. He said with great surprise, "Guanyin Bodhisattva has appeared." "What?" Zheng Zumo hurriedly turned around. When she saw the empty sky without even a single cloud, she finally realized something. Li Yi held the embroidered bag in his hand and ignored Zheng Zumo's murderous eyes. He pointed at a style of underwear and said, "This color can be a little more colorful, a little wilder." Zheng Zumo glared at Li Yi and stood up angrily. When she turned around and walked to Yongning, she immediately put on a smile and said, "Cindy, come here. Sister will help you fly." Okay. Yongning said happily. She looked at Li Yi and found that he had his back to her. She quietly ran to Zheng Zumo and whispered, "Shu, Sister Tseng, come here. I'll tell you a secret." "What secret does Cindy want to tell sister?" Zheng Zumo squatted down and asked with a smile. Yongning looked at Li Yi again and whispered, "Last time I asked brother if he liked Sister Tseng. Brother said he liked her." Zheng Zumo was startled. She could roughly guess what the scene was like at the time. However, she still had a little expectation in her heart. She asked, "How did Cindy ask?" "Cindy first." Seeing the little girl's serious answer, Zheng Zumo shook her head. It was not much different from what she had guessed. However, he was probably just coaxing the little girl. How could he like her? She pinched Yongning's little face and felt inexplicably disappointed. However, she still smiled and said, "Come, sister will help you fly." "By the way, why is this called a paper plane?" "What is a plane?" Yongning didn't answer this question. She said mysteriously, "Also, brother said last time that he wanted to marry Sister Tseng as a concubine and bring Sister Tseng home." "What is a concubine? When will sister come home with us?" Zheng Zumo's body shook and the smile on her face froze. The paper plane in her hand also fell to the ground. Li Yi looked at Zheng Zumo walking back to the room with her head down. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. "It can't be just because I ate a small bag of melon seeds?" "Hey, what's wrong with you?" "I'll return the melon seeds to you." It can't be. How about I buy a big bag for you? Hey, why did you close the door? Seeing her go in and close the door, Li stood up in shock. He was a little confused. It's just a few melon seeds. Qin Manor in a certain exquisite courtyard. Congratulations on your recovery, brother Qin. Congratulations, young Duke Qin. Young Duke Qin has just recovered from his injury, so it's not suitable for you to drink. This toast is for you. Young Duke Qin was an influential figure in the capital's foppish circle. Not only was his status respected, but his luck was also different from others. He was violently beaten by Crown Prince Li Xian, slapped in the face by Li Xianzi, and grounded by Prime Minister Qin for half a year. It was not easy for him to end his grounding early. But in less than 2 days he was seriously injured by a righteous man who saw injustice because he molested a woman on the street. Several of his ribs were broken, and he had been recuperating at home until today. Such a bumpy experience made those who saw it sad and those who heard it cry. Everyone was watching with wide eyes to see what the next unfortunate thing that young Duke Qin would encounter would be. There were only 2 people who could sit at the same table as Qin. Cui Qingyu took a sip of wine and asked, "That thief still hasn't been caught?" Qin Lijun shook his head and said, "That person acted decisively. Before the officers arrived, he had already left the city. Although he left his name behind, for people like that, once they escape, it will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to catch them again." "It's fine." Qin Yu shrugged as if he didn't care much about this matter. He asked, "I heard that your highness also left the palace?" "Just 2 days ago." Cui Qingyu nodded and said, "With your highness's temper, why didn't you find trouble with that person?" Qin Yu raised his eyebrows and asked, "You mean Li Yi?" Cui Qingyu glanced at him. The hand of a servant girl who was pouring wine for him suddenly trembled and the wine spilled on the table. The servant girl with a long scar on her face turned pale and hurriedly wiped it with her sleeve. Cui Qingyu frowned and said, Okay, put it here, I'll do it myself. Besides that, Li Xianzi, who is deeply favored by the emperor. Oh, I should call him Li Xianbo now. Besides him, who else could it be?" Qin Yu's mouth pulled into a strange smile. Cui Qingyu shook his head and said, "With his current status, no matter what, your highness can't do anything to him. After your highness left the palace, your highness closed your door and didn't go out. I heard from the servants of the prince's mansion that your highness only read books every day and seems to have completely changed your temperament." Cui Qingyu's voice gradually became smaller. The servant girl with a scar on her face retreated to the back. She lowered her head and bit her lips. Her eyes were extremely complicated. Chapter 534. Xiao Chui, come here. Yong Ning and Shaning were playing house in the yard. Li sat on the stone bench and waved at Xiao Chui. "Li, what's the matter?" Xiao Chui ran over. "Is your young mistress on her period these days?" Although he knew that it was inappropriate to ask this question, Zheng Zumo had ignored him for a long time because of those melon seeds. Miss Zheng wasn't that stingy, so Li felt that the problem should be in other areas. Ah. When Xiao Chui heard this, she was stunned for a moment. Then, her face turned so red that it looked like blood was about to drip out. This kind of thing about a woman, how could she casually tell others? If she said something like this, the young mistress would beat her to death if she knew. No, in a few days. Thinking of this, Xiao Chui said with a red face. "I see." Li shook his head. "If it wasn't for that reason, what else could it be?" Xiao Chui lowered her head and muttered, "I don't know what's wrong with the young mistress these days. She's always in a daze and often forgetful. The young mistress has never been like this before. In short, it's very strange." Inside the room, Zheng Zumo sat at the table with a brush in her hand. Her eyes were slightly unfocused, and the rice paper in front of her was blank. The knocking continued for a long time before she heard it. She put down the brush and said, "The door isn't closed. Come in." Crash. Li Yi threw a big bag on the table, looked at her and said, "Salt and pepper flavor, 5 spices flavor, cream flavor, red dates flavor, plum flavor. I just ate a few of your melon seeds. Is there a need to be so angry for so long?" Zheng Zumo was stunned. She opened one of the small bags and a strange fragrance wafted out. She tasted one and the expression on her pretty face changed slightly. Then she put them all away and said to Li Yi, "When was I angry?" It was a woman's nature to refuse to admit it. She almost wrote the word angry on her face. "How dare you say you're not angry? If you're not angry, then give me back my melon seeds. You mentioned a clothing store yesterday. What's going on?" Zheng Zumo deliberately changed the topic. Li shook his head and was finally able to speak normally. He said, "The fame of underwear has already spread. We can expand our business and make ready-made clothes. In addition to the common styles, we can also design some new styles and divide the sizes. Whichever one the customer likes, they can wear it directly after paying the bill. In this era there were no clothing stores. There were only cloth shops. Small families would buy cloth at home and cut it into their own clothes. Rich families would hire a tailor to make it, so there was no concept of ready-made clothes for the time being. Food, clothing, housing, and transportation. No matter what era it was, people couldn't live without these four things. If you were to engage in these four industries, you would never have to worry about being eliminated by the times. Although she would be involved in the ready-made clothing industry together with Her Royal Highness, she had always contributed money, manpower, and effort. She would just sit back and wait for her share of the profits. She would not ask about the management. Zheng Zimo said while eating melon seeds, after opening 2 new underwear stores, there is a lack of manpower. If we want to open a ready-made clothing store, we will need more women who are good at needlework. I'm afraid the brothel will not be able to find so many. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about this. There will be no shortage of manpower soon." Near the capital, the new marriage law was enforced. In the following period of time, there would be many women between the ages of 13 and 16 staying at home doing nothing. This was also a headache for the court. If they could have something to do and solve the problem of employment for women of the right age, the court would definitely strongly support it. Then when Sister Ruoqing comes back, I will discuss it with her. Zheng Zimo said, then looked at Li Yi and said, I have something to ask you. What? Li Yi looked back at her. You. Zheng Zimo opened her mouth and thought about it. In the end she didn't say anything. She waved her hand and said, "Forget it, it's nothing." It was very impolite to not finish a sentence, especially for people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. This time, Li Yi was not in a hurry to leave. He looked at her and asked, "What is it?" "Nothing, you can go." Zheng Zimo waved her hand impatiently. "Really? Really? Then let me grab a handful of melon seeds before I go. I want the creamy ones." The Wang family village was a small village less than 10 miles away from the capital. Although the Wang family village was located outside the most prosperous capital of the Jing kingdom, it didn't have much of the capital's glory. The dozens of families in the village relied on the thin fields at the front of the village to eat. When the year was good, they could drink thin rice every meal. When the year was bad, the family had to tighten their belts and pray for God's blessing. Wang Lauer was an ordinary villager in the Wang family village. At this time he was squatting on a rock in the yard, smoking a pipe and sighing. "Dad, it's time to eat." A little girl about 10 years old, wearing coarse clothes and an apron, came out of the dilapidated house. She walked in front of him and said timidly, "Eat, eat, eat. You only know how to eat all day. You won't be able to get married." Wang Lauer was angry when he saw his third daughter and waved his hand impatiently. Seeing this, the little girl's body trembled and hurriedly retreated back into the house. Wang Lauer put the pipe on the rock and coughed and said angrily, "What is the court doing? Are they trying to kill me?" His wife was disappointing and gave him 3 daughters in a row. Although he still had a strong desire to have a son, he didn't dare to have another one. If he gave birth to a daughter, he wouldn't be able to continue living. Although they were daughters, they were also his children. Although they were often beaten and scolded, they had been living in poverty for more than 10 years, and they had grown up one by one. His eldest daughter was 14 years old and had just been engaged. The second daughter was 13 years old and was also at the age to get married. He thought that if his 2 daughters got married, there would be 2 mouths to feed at home, and he would have betrothal gifts from 2 families so he could live a better life. However, he didn't expect that his eldest daughter would get married in a month. The court suddenly issued an order that women couldn't get married before they were 16 years old. This delayed the 2 children all of a sudden. Wang Lauer suddenly felt a lot of pressure and couldn't live anymore. King court, they don't let people live. Wang Lauer scolded angrily. A middle-aged woman poked her head out of the house and said, "Keep your voice down. If someone hears you, you'll be punished." It would have been better if she hadn't said it. As soon as this matter was brought up, Wang Lauer became even angrier. He jumped down from the rock and scolded, "What's going on? They're allowed to have children, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. I just want to talk about it. This King court, they even care about me marrying off my daughter. Wang Lauer, who are you calling King dog?" Following this voice, an official dressed in black walked in from outside. "This King Wang Ergu, he owes me 2 copper coins and hasn't paid me back in a month." Wang Lauer looked at the official with a fawning expression and asked, "Sir, what brings you here today?" The official waved his hand and flipped through a booklet in his hand. He went straight to the point and said, "Wang Lauer, your Zhaodi and Indi are both over 13 years old, right?" When Wang Lauer heard this, he was stunned for a moment. His expression immediately changed and he said warily, "Sir, my Zhaodi and Indi are both betrothed. I don't care if they are betrothed or not as long as they are over 13 years old." "Oh right, your Liodi?" Wang Lauer's face was full of fear. My Liodi is only 10 years old. She is still a child." The official glanced at her and directly asked, "It said that if any family has a girl who is over 13 years old and has good sewing skills, she can work in the workshop. She will work for 8 hours a day and will be paid 10 copper coins. Will your family's Zhaodi and Indi go?" No. Wang Lauer shook his head repeatedly. How could he believe the official's nonsense? 10 copper coins for 8 hours a day? He couldn't even earn that much even if he worked 16 hours a day. Was he trying to trick his own daughter? "All right, then I'll remember it." The official waved his hand and turned to leave. Wang Lauer was stunned when he heard this. He left just like that and didn't want to force him? What if he scared him a little more and he agreed? Dad. A figure hurriedly ran in from outside. It was a 13 or 14-year-old girl who panted and said, "Dad, I heard that Her Royal Highness's workshop is recruiting people. For the first 3 months, it will be 10 copper coins a day. After 3 months, it will be 15 copper coins a day." "Is it true?" Wang Lauer asked with his eyes wide open. "It's true." The girl nodded repeatedly and said, "There is a notice outside. The official is going from door to register. I heard that the quota is limited this time. I saw the official just now. Dad, did you register me in Indi?" Wang Lauer was stunned again. After he came to his senses, he ran outside. "Sir, don't go. I'm willing. Chapter 535. Li Yi had always felt that 2 months was a long time, but in reality, it was just a blink of an eye. It was already mid-September in the second year of Jinghe. If it wasn't for the fact that the old emperor had delayed Yongning's return to the palace by 10 days, they would have left a few days ago. The reason why it was them and not her was because in the past 2 months, that Sundra Lolita had used the excuse of visiting Yongning to visit them for 2 whole months. The official reason for these 2 months was to treat Yongning's illness. Of course, this matter was still limited to a very small number of people. After all, for her safety, the old emperor wouldn't spread the news of the young princess leaving the palace. None of the court officials knew about this. Although Li Yi knew that Yongning wasn't sick at all, it would be good for her to leave the palace for a few days. With a soul that didn't match this era, staying in the palace all day would probably cause her illness. He didn't dare to make any excessive requests. In the future, he would take her out of the palace for half a course of treatment every month for 3 to 5 days. The old emperor wouldn't likely refuse. In these 2 months, it took a lot of effort to finally make her understand what she could say and what she couldn't. Although most people treated her words as the nonsense of a child, when she grew up in a few years and was heard by someone with ulterior motives, there would be some trouble. Drunken Moon Restaurant, I'm hungry. Let's go eat here." The proud Lolita didn't want to shop anymore. When they walked to a certain restaurant, she pulled on Li Yi's arm and kept shaking it. Li Yi raised his eyebrows and said, "Didn't you want to eat braised prawns today? We don't have it here." "Let's eat here first. We'll eat something else when we get back." The proud Lolita, who was good at accounting, would never suffer a loss. Although she said that she would eat a lot of delicious food when they got back, that was a matter for when they got back. It didn't conflict with what they ate now. Li Yi looked at Yongning and saw her nod. He waved his hand helplessly and said, "Then let's go in. I'll go buy something over there. You guys go in first." Sung Zimo said to them and took Xiao Chui to a shop in front of them. It was the Golden Jade Pavilion, a place that sold jewelry. Yongning was sticking to him more than she was sticking to him, and this caused Li Yi to feel rather depressed. Could it be that young girls are naturally easier to get close to? Of course, he was only slightly depressed, and he hoped that Yongning would be able to find more sustenance here. Find a quiet room. It's best if it's near the window. Li Yi looked at him and said as soon as he walked in, a waiter came out to welcome him with a smile. "Sir, have you made a reservation?" The waiter asked with a smile. "What's wrong? Is it a full house today?" Li Yi looked around. Although it was mealtime, there weren't many people eating here. There shouldn't be no room. "Sir, there is something you don't know. Guests that come to the Drunken Moon Inn must make a reservation in advance. This is the rule of the Drunken Moon Inn," the waiter patiently explained. Li Yi looked at the old man behind him. This kind of thing should be a piece of cake for them. The old man nodded and walked to the front. Not long after, the waiter wiped the sweat on his forehead, and the smile on his face became even brighter. "Sir, please go upstairs." Although he was just a small waiter in the Drunken Moon Inn, he had received many nobles on a daily basis, so he naturally had some experience. Although these people still didn't reveal their identity, the old man gave off a very scary feeling. The most important thing was that sign. In short, these people probably couldn't be easily offended. Making a reservation in advance was the rule of the Drunken Moon Inn. Rules were made to be broken. Rules for ordinary people were not suitable for some people. On the way upstairs, the gray-clothed old man frowned and asked, "Why not the Sky Room one?" The waiter wiped his cold sweat and said carefully, "Sir, unfortunately the Sky Room one was booked by a group of nobles today." Okay, as long as there's food. People who came from the palace had a lot of problems. Li waved his hand. This kind of mysterious sense of superiority, other than the palace, couldn't be cultivated in ordinary places. When he passed by the so-called Sky Room one, a waiter went in to serve the dishes. Li casually glanced over and saw that there were quite a lot of people in the room. There was even a woman singing. She really knew how to enjoy herself. He wasn't interested in the so-called nobles there, so he turned his gaze away and was led by the waiter to a room next door. The standard of this Drunken Moon Inn was not low, even in the capital. The private room was extremely spacious, and even the surrounding walls were hung with paintings and calligraphy. Li only needed to glance at them to know that the value of these things was not low. Of course, the most representative of the standards was the price of the dishes here. A plate of tofu for 3 taels of silver, a huge profit. This was no different from robbing people. Could it be that their tofu was colorful? The price of this plate of tofu was enough to cover the annual expenses of a relatively well-off family. Not to mention ordinary people, without tens of thousands of taels of silver, they wouldn't even dare to order a plate of tofu here. Only those rich people who wanted to show off their status, at least for Li, although he wasn't short of money, he wouldn't waste it like this. Of course, if the money was reimbursed by the palace, it would be a different story. When the arrogant Lolita and Yong Ning were discussing what to eat, Li took a sip of tea and thought about something else. Since the academy was still under construction, it would take a long time. In the next period of time he might be completely free, but he wouldn't be free for long, because the hero competition was about to begin. Downstairs in the Drunken Moon Inn, Tsing Zumo and Xiao Chui walked in. Xiao Chui pouted and said, "Bing Ning and Cinny are leaving so soon, I'm a bit reluctant." Tsing Zumo only smiled. She naturally liked the two innocent and cute girls. However, judging from their dressing and daily behavior, both of them had received orthodox education, especially the girl named Li Bing Ning. Her family background was most likely not low. She had learned etiquette at home when she was a child, so she was a little more sensitive to these things. What's more, a few days ago the two little girls each gave her a bracelet, and the other gave her a hairpin. None of them were ordinary items and they looked expensive. How could an ordinary person take them out? Although she didn't know their specific identity, she could guess a little. How could the daughters of such a big family be fostered in someone else's house for a long time? A few days ago, she ordered 2 bracelets from the Golden Jade Pavilion. In terms of value, it might not be comparable to the things they gave, but as a parting gift, it wouldn't look shabby. Seeing that there were guests coming in, a waiter immediately went to greet them. Xiao Chui described a few words to them, and the waiter immediately stretched out his hand respectfully. "2 ladies, please go upstairs, the person you are looking for is in the second Sky Room." The two of them walked up the stairs, and at this moment, a young man walked out of the first room. When he saw the waiter walking toward him, he cursed, "Why haven't you served the 2 pots of 1000-day drunken wine yet? Why are you wasting your time looking for them?" Halfway through his words, he looked at the 2 girls behind the waiter, and his expression was slightly startled. A puzzled expression appeared on his face, and he scratched his head as if he remembered something and immediately exclaimed, "It's you?" Chapter 536. Today in this Drunken Moon Tower we are holding a banquet for you. The banquet is a little shabby. I hope you don't mind. In the first room of Drunken Moon Tower, a luxuriously dressed young man raised his glass to the handsome young man opposite him. "Although I live far away in Chuzhou, I know that this Drunken Moon Tower is not shabby. Besides, we are all on the same side. Xiexine, you are welcome." The young man waved his hand and took a sip of wine. He turned to the person next to him and asked, "When we were in Chuzhou, I heard that Brother Qin was unwell. How are you now?" "I am fine." Qin Yu cupped his hands and said, "Recently he had just recovered." According to the doctor's advice, he should focus on recuperation and should not be too active. However, Duanyang's identity was special. Among his peers, someone of similar status had to come out to greet him. Qin Lijun and Cui Qingyu were busy, so he was the only one left. The young man smiled and said, "With your identity, you should take more guards with you when you go out in the future." Qingyu nodded. He was used to being domineering in the capital and no one dared to stop him. Who would have thought that he would encounter what happened last time? After this incident, he had greatly increased the number of guards to avoid encountering strong people in Jianghu like last time. At this moment there were about 10 young people at the banquet. Among them little Duke Qin and Duanyang were the leaders. Duanyang was the son of King Hui. His mother was the legitimate daughter of the Cui family and the younger sister of concubine Cui. Therefore he had a close relationship with the Cui family and the king of Shu. The young man looked at Qingyu and asked, "Have you seen brother king of Shu these days? His Highness has closed the door of his mansion since he came out of the palace." Qingyu shook his head and said, "Although I'm not in the capital, I've heard about what happened to the king of Shu. Who exactly is the county magistrate of Chang'an? How could he be so free and unfettered when he offended his superior? What's going on?" Speaking of this matter, Royal Prince Duanyang's face showed a hint of sternness. He only had a general idea of this matter, but he did not know the details. The people at the banquet looked at each other. Speaking of which, half of the people present had the most direct impression of who that county magistrate Li was. Every time he thought about the matter of the academy's enrollment, he couldn't help but feel depressed. Then he's a complete lunatic," one of them said through gritted teeth. It was more suitable to describe County Uncle Li as a madman than to describe young Duke Qin. Putting aside the fact that he had beaten up a prince in public, he was the only person in the history of the country who could force His Majesty and all the officials to submit even though he was recruiting students for the academy. He had neglected his duties for personal reasons and openly targeted the King of Shu's faction. Even though they'd managed to get a spot in the end, the price they'd paid was huge. Of course, this involved deeper matters and it wasn't something they could participate in. No one present dared to provoke that person. After all, who would dare to provoke a lunatic who had intermittent hysteria, who could act up at any time, and who would not be severely punished even if he beat up a prince? It was said that even the Princess Royal, who was always with him, had contracted intermittent hysteria. Of course, these speculations were not suitable to be voiced out now. Qingyu lowered his head and drank his wine. When he heard the name Li Yi to Royal Prince Duanyang, there was no expression on his face, but a trace of haze appeared in the depths of his eyes. At this moment someone came in from outside. A young man dressed as a servant walked over quickly and said a few words in Qinyu's ear. Qinyu suddenly turned around and looked at him. After a moment, he stood up from his seat with an extremely gloomy expression. "Young Duke Qin, what's wrong?" Everyone was surprised and also stood up one after another. "Why hasn't she come yet?" The dishes on the table were almost served, but because eldest Miss Zheng hadn't arrived yet, Li Yi and the two little Lolas hadn't moved their chopsticks. She took a sip of tea and looked outside in confusion. "Yes, when will elder sister Zheng come? I'm starving." The proud Lolita covered her stomach to protest. "If you keep eating like this you're going to get fat," Li Yi kindly reminded her. She was the emperor's most beloved princess and had lived a luxurious life since she was a child. Now that she was out of the palace she couldn't control her mouth and wanted to taste anything delicious. "How is that possible? I practice martial arts with imperial sister every day." The proud Lolita looked indifferent. Then she seemed to remember something and looked at Li Yi angrily and asked, "What's wrong? If I get fat you won't want me anymore? I'm telling you, stop, stop, stop." Li Yi had a headache and hurriedly waved his hand. "Don't say such things in front of your imperial father and imperial mother." The unconvinced proud Lolita wanted to say something more, but the door was suddenly pushed open. Zheng Zumo walked in with a flustered expression and said, "Quick, let's go." The proud Lolita and Yong Ning were the first to be pulled up by her and quickly walked out of the door. Li Yi also stood up curiously. The proud Lolita shouted as she walked out of the door, "Hey, don't go. We haven't eaten a bite yet, there's still a beggar's chicken not served." The gray-robed elder standing at the door stopped the woman who was holding the two princesses. From the room on the side a figure walked out. Then 2, 3 and more than 10 people walked out. Zheng Zumo's face was pale as she protected the two little girls behind her. Xiao Chui stood beside her. When she saw the man walking in front of the crowd, there was no trace of blood on her pretty face. "It's over," she thought in her heart. Royal Prince Duanyang looked at the woman in front of him and a trace of amazement flashed through his eyes. However, if it was only because he liked this woman, Qin Yu shouldn't have such a big reaction. After all, it was well known that his hobbies were different from others. Qin Yu covered his chest with one hand. It seemed that he felt pain again but more shame. A trace of mockery appeared at the corner of his mouth and he said, "Two ladies, what a coincidence." Zheng Zumo pushed the two little girls behind her, and her heart completely sank. Young Duke Qin. She didn't expect that there would be a day when she would see him again, and on such an occasion. That day she and Xiao Chui disguised themselves as men and hurriedly escaped from the scene. After finding Wan Ruoqing, they changed into women's clothes. Later she learned that young Duke Qin was beaten in the street. The matter was very big, and the whole city was searching for the perpetrator. At that time she was actually also nervous. It was not until later, when the matter gradually subsided, that she and Xiao Chui were relieved. However, she never thought that she would be recognized like this today. Thinking of the other party's power and background, her body trembled and she couldn't help but take a step back. After that, she felt a hand patting her shoulder. Li Yi walked out of the room, and when the mocking smile on Qin Yu's face froze, he spoke with a smile. "Yes, it's really a coincidence. Young Duke Qin." Crash. At the same time that Li Yi took a step forward, several people on the opposite side couldn't help but take a step back. Li Yi, County Uncle Li, who had long been famous in the capital, was likely to go crazy and kill people on the spot. Who didn't know him? Who wasn't afraid? Who is he? Royal Prince Duanyang looked around, and a trace of surprise appeared on his face as he asked. "He is Li Yi," someone said with a complicated expression, "County Uncle of Chang and Li Yi." Chapter 537. It's really a coincidence. Qin Yu said after a while, and the expression on his face had returned to indifference. Young master, this beggar's chicken. Shall we take it in?" A waiter of the Zuyu Tower stood at the stairway, looked at the scene in front of him and said in a trembling voice, "Take it in, we have paid for it." The proud Lolita had been thinking about the chicken for a long time, and immediately urged. Xiao Cui's face was full of fear and she was about to cry. "Young lady, what time is it? Why are you still thinking about the beggar's chicken? They can't even leave." "Young Duke Qin, if there is no other urgent matter, we will go in." Li Yi pointed to the inside of the room and said, "The dishes will be cold later." Qin Yu took a deep breath, glanced at the strange little girl and said with a smile, "Uncle Li, please help yourself, but these two girls can't leave." Li Yi looked at him in astonishment and asked, "Why is this so? In broad daylight, with the heaven and earth bright and clear, could it be that young Duke Qin wants to put on a good show of forcefully snatching a girl from a good family?" When Li Yi spoke, he deliberately emphasized the word "again." The smile on Qin Yu's face froze, and then his chest began to rise and fall slightly. The rest of the people looked at him. Motherf **Ker, it's just a slap in the face. Young Duke Qin was beaten and seriously injured by a passing Jianghu swordsman because he molested a good girl in the street, and he had to rest at home for several months. It could be said that he had lost his face completely. When people mentioned this matter, they would only say that he was injured by a villain, and no one dared to mention molesting a good girl. This Uncle Li was really good at slapping people's faces and cursing people's shortcomings. Last time in the Imperial Palace he slapped young Duke Qin fiercely twice, and now this sentence was no less than a slap in the face, which was a double blow to his spirit and body. There were rumors among the people that this Uncle Li was worthy of being the nemesis of young Duke Qin. "You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. County Uncle Li, be careful with your words." When Qin Yu spoke again, he didn't hide the anger in his eyes. If it were someone else, he would have already sent out his guards to vent the anger that had accumulated in his heart for the past few months. However, at this moment he was just angry. After all, although he had the title of Madman Qin, the person in front of him was a real madman. He didn't have to take responsibility for beating people, and he was a madman with the certificate of the Imperial Physician Bureau. "Hey, young Duke Qin, don't be modest." Li Yi reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Then he turned to Zheng Zumo and said, "Let's go. We've been out for a long time. The food is cold." Zheng Zumo bit his teeth and said, "You guys go in first. They won't do anything to us." She knew what kind of impact the previous incident would have. The government defined it as an assassination. If the swordsman was caught, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, she and Xiao Chui were also victims. Even if they really went to the government, they could explain it clearly. There was a prime minister in Qin's mansion, who also had extraordinary power in the court. She didn't want to get Li Yi involved. Li didn't rush in this time. He looked at her and asked, "How do you know him?" Xiao Chui said with some grievance, "Yes, last time when Miss and I just came to the capital they insisted that Miss and I go with them. A passing swordsman couldn't stand it, so he beat him hard. So those two women are you?" It was also the first time that Li Yi had heard of this matter, and his tone was a little surprised. It was really true that people who were not a family would not enter the house. This young Duke Qin and him were opposite of each other. Seeing that young Duke Qin was obviously no match for County Magistrate Li, a young man immediately stood out and said, "Li, Supervisor Li, these two women are involved in the case of the assassination of young Duke Qin. We have sent someone to inform the government, and there will be an official coming soon. Is Supervisor Li going to protect them?" "You are?" Li looked at him and asked. The young man said, "I am Li Jianren." "Oh, from the family of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works?" Li Yi still had some impression of this name. After all, there weren't many people who could come up with such a fresh and refined name. It was high-end and classy. "Yes." Li Jianren cupped his hands, but he was depressed in his heart. In this kind of occasion, it was not suitable for him to stand out. After all, he still had to study at the mathematics college in the future. If he offended the supervisor before he officially enrolled, would he have a good life in the future? Not bad, I will remember you." Li nodded and said, "Then there is no hurry. Let's wait for the official to come first." He looked back at Zheng Zimo and said, "What are you waiting for? Go in and eat. It cost a lot of money." When he was about to go in, he looked back at Qin Yu and asked seriously, "Is it necessary?" "It is," Qin Yu said with a smile. Li nodded, turned around and closed the door. Watching them walk back into the room and close the door, Prince Duanyang was already full of anger. Arrogant, simply too arrogant. Although he was far away in Chuzhou and was not very familiar with the affairs of the capital, he did not expect that a small county uncle would dare to be so presumptuous in front of him and young Duke Qin. Li Jianren and Cui Shixin and the others shook their heads. This was arrogance? Royal Prince Duanyang seemed to have underestimated County Uncle Li too much. Beating up young Duke Qin, beating up His Royal Highness King of Shu, forcing the officials and His Majesty to make concessions, everything he did could not be described as arrogant. Prince Duanyang was angry and kicked the door of the private room, but was stopped by Qin Yu. "Wait." Qin Yu only said this one word. He had dealt with Li Yi more than once, so naturally he would not look down on him. It was not suitable for him and Prince Duanyang to intervene in this matter. If the government directly intervened, it would be official business. Even if Li Yi was favored by the emperor, could he reach into the government of the capital? But the Qin family could. Although Qin Yu of the Qin family was no longer the capital magistrate and some things did become troublesome, at least half of the people present did not care about a small capital magistrate. The Jingdo magistrate Lu Daiyou also knew that in the eyes of those famous wastrels in Jingdo, he, the Jingdo magistrate, was nothing and would be held back in every way. In his heart, he cursed the little Duke Qin. What's the use of finding those two women? If you have the ability, go and find that hero who beat you up. You failed to flirt with an innocent woman and got beaten up instead. You've lost all your face and you still dare to come out and make a fool of yourself. Now you seem to want to do something to those two innocent women. Do you really think that you own the government? However, he could not ignore this matter and even had to go in person. After all, he could not afford to offend any of those people. Hurry up. County Magistrate Lu opened the curtain and urged the sedan bearers. Drunken Moon Tower, room number 2. Outside the door, there were several people watching vigilantly to prevent the people inside from slipping away. Inside the room, the arrogant Lolita ate without caring about her image. Li Yi had no interest in the beggar's chicken, but he had to say that the tea here was not bad. It was just a little expensive, 10 taels of silver for a pot. He really felt sorry for the old emperor. Go get another pot of tea. He turned his head and ordered the waiter standing behind him. The gray-robed old man next to him finally could not help frowning at him and asked, "Is it necessary?" Li looked at him and asked in surprise, "Isn't it just 2 pots of tea? Won't the palace reimburse it?" After a moment he sighed and said, "You just heard, he said it is necessary." Chapter 538. Zheng Zimo looked at Li Yi with a worried expression. She wanted to say something but stopped. "What about me? Let's eat." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Do you still have any melon seeds? I still want the cream flavor." Zheng Zimo took out a small embroidered bag from her waist and said, "There's no cream flavor left. There's only 5 cents left." Forget it, it's still edible. Li Yi nodded, then looked at the 2 brocade boxes she placed on the table and asked, "What are these?" "A gift for Bing Ning and Xiane." Perhaps Li Yi's calmness infected her. Zheng Zumo relaxed a little and said, What gift?" Hearing the gift, the proud lowly put down the drumstick and wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. "It's not something expensive. Open it and see if you like it." Zheng Zumo handed over the box and said with a smile, "Wow, there's a gift." The proud Lolita still had the temperament of a young girl. She couldn't wait to take the brocade boxes. The 2 brocade boxes had her and Yong Ning's names written on them. She handed the other brocade box to Yong Ning and quickly opened her own brocade box. So beautiful. Seeing the thing lying in the box, the proud lowly couldn't help but exclaim. Li looked at it. It turned out to be a bracelet. This kind of accessory was very common in the future, but it naturally didn't exist in the present. He once told Zheng Zumo that he could open an accessory shop in the future and sell it with ready-made clothes. Of course, it was impossible to use precious gems in this world. The premise was that he could first burn the glass, which could greatly reduce the cost. However, this idea would probably have to wait for a long time. After all, those sparkling and translucent things were very expensive. Even if ordinary glass was sold at the price of gemstones, there would still be countless people fighting to buy it. The profit was unimaginable, even far exceeding that of perfume and spirits. However, it was not suitable to take it out too early. The thing on these 2 bracelets was naturally not glass, but it could also be regarded as jewelry. However, with Zheng Zumo's current wealth, she could easily buy it. And this strangely shaped bracelet should have been personally designed by her. Although the proud Lolita lived in the palace and had seen countless jewelry, it was impossible for her to have seen this kind. "Thank you, Sister Zheng." After the proud lowly came back to her senses, she smiled sweetly at Zheng Zumo. After thinking for a moment, she picked up the other drumstick in her bowl for Zheng Zumo. "Thank you, big sister." Yong Ning was not as excited as her sister, but she still looked very happy. Zheng Zumo looked at the 2 of them, then looked outside the door and said worriedly, Li put a piece of tofu in her bowl and said, "Don't worry, people who disturb other people's meals usually don't have a good ending. Hurry up and eat, it's really going to get cold." Xiao Chui was on the verge of tears. The people outside were all fiendish and it was obvious that they were not good people. They were about to call the officials, so how could the young miss and Lili still eat? With tears in her eyes, she picked up a piece of tofu. This tofu is really delicious. No wonder it only costs 3 taels of silver. I have to have a good taste. This person is so bold and arrogant. I don't believe you can bear it until now. In another room, Duke Duanyang looked at Qin Yu and said. Qin Yu lowered his head and drank a cup of wine without saying anything. With his character, he naturally would not let go of those who offended him so easily. However, on the surface he could not do anything at all. These days his grandfather was very strict with him. Most of the time he was grounded at home or recuperated, but in fact he did a lot of things secretly. However, the first time he sent someone to follow him, he was beaten up and thrown into a deep alley. The second time his leg was directly broken. After that, he sent out a martial arts master secretly recruited, but the result was the same. Now, the Qin's mansion had a lot of people with broken hands and feet. After that, he gave up the idea of secretly taking revenge. No matter how proud he was, he had to admit that he was helpless against Li Yi. Originally, after beating up the king of Shu, he entrusted this matter to the king of Shu. However, he did not expect that after the king of Shu came out of the palace, he became a good boy, reading at home all day or visiting some officials of the court. Until now he had not seen the king of Shu. The humiliation he suffered on the street last time made him the laughing stock of the whole capital, which was still unforgettable. This time, when he met these 2 women again in the Drunken Moon Tower, he naturally would not let them go. However, with the intervention of Li Yi, he had to be careful. The best way was to borrow a knife. Borrowing a knife from the imperial court. As long as he insisted that the 2 women were related to the thief, the following things would naturally be logical. No matter how arrogant he was, someone would not forgive him for daring to interfere with the imperial court's investigation. At this time the door was pushed open. A servant of the Qin's mansion came in and said, "Young master, Lord Lu is here." Qin Yu stood up from his seat and walked out of the door. He cupped his hands in obeisance to a person who had just walked up the stairs and said with a smile, "This time I have caused trouble for Lord Lu." The current capital magistrate, Lu Daiyou, did not belong to Prime Minister Qin. He used to work under the capital governor, Dong Wenyun, and Dong Wenyun's father-in-law was Prime Minister Shen, who had the same status as his grandfather. Therefore, although he looked down on this capital magistrate, he could not be too arrogant at this moment. Young Duke Qin, you are too serious. County Magistrate Lu also cupped his hands in obeisance and said with a smile, "This is my duty. Young Duke Qin, you don't have to be so polite." Qin Yu smiled and pointed to the young man beside him and said, "This is Prince Duanyang." County Magistrate Lu was shocked. He did not expect that this matter would involve Prince Duanyang. This was an existence that he could not afford to offend. He hurriedly cupped his hands in obeisance and said, "Greetings, Prince Duanyang." The young man waved his hand and said, "Sir, you'd better get down to business first. The two people are in the room behind you." Hearing this, County Magistrate Lu immediately became a little vigilant. There was Royal Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin, and all the other hedonistic young masters of the capital. Which one of them didn't have a heaven-defying background? Yet they had gone out of their way to invite an official over. If someone said that there was no inside story to this matter, he wouldn't believe it even if they beat him to death. However, as the county magistrate, this was indeed his duty. At this time he could only bite the bullet and do it. "Sir, do you want to break the door?" Seeing County Magistrate Lu pointing to the door, a yamen runner immediately asked. The more than 10 yamen runners who followed him here looked a little excited. They were working for these big shots. If they did it well, County Magistrate Lu would benefit a lot. Naturally, they would also benefit a lot. "Knock on the door." County Magistrate Lu glared at him and said, "A group of brainless things. If there was really something good, would these people let them come here?" It was obvious that there was trouble. Before the yamen runner had time to knock on the door opened from the inside. Li looked at County Magistrate Lu standing at the door and said in surprise, "Hey County Magistrate Lu, why are you here? I haven't seen you for a long time." County Magistrate Lu was stunned for a moment, then his face immediately showed a happy expression and said, "Sir Li, how come it's you? I haven't seen you for a long time." County Magistrate Lu was full of gratitude for this former County Magistrate Li. If it were not for him, he was afraid that he would still be in the position of Anshi County Magistrate, waiting to retire. How could he sit in the position of the capital magistrate? His future was even brighter. He was afraid that in a few years or dozens of years, he would be able to sit in one of the highest positions. Seeing that the two people were standing at the door and chatting, Prince Duanyang was stunned. After being stunned for a while, Qin Yu's face gradually became gloomy. The rest of the people looked at County Magistrate Lu and were even more surprised. They had asked him to come here to arrest people. Who would have thought that County Magistrate Lu would actually chat with them? Chapter 539. Ahem, Lord Lu. Royal Prince Duanyang finally couldn't help opening his mouth. His tone was a little high and there was a bit of dissatisfaction in his voice. County Magistrate Lu just remembered why he knocked on the door. He looked at Li Yi, then looked at young Duke Qin, Royal Prince Duanyang, and the others. The person they wanted to arrest was actually related to Lord Li? This bunch of fellas truly harbored malicious intentions. This was the noble person in his life. Not only did he not want to offend him, but from other aspects, it was also very unwise to offend an important official who was favored by the emperor. "Lord Lu, this is." Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Lu and asked with a faint smile. "This." County Magistrate Lu's heart was extremely tangled. It was so good to play with his concubine at home. Why did he have to run out and get involved in this muddy water? Wasn't he looking for trouble for himself? "I want to eat this and this and this too." A clear voice came from the room. County Magistrate Lu's eyes inadvertently glanced at it and could no longer move away. That little girl waving chopsticks, why did she look so much like Princess Shining? Last time when he was summoned to the palace, he accidentally met Arrestor Li. No, it should be Princess Royal Highness. At that time, there was another person beside Princess Royal Highness. County Magistrate Lu vaguely remembered that the palace servants called her Princess Shining. Because of this, he looked at the little girl a few more times and had a deep memory. If the little girl in the room wore a palace dress, wouldn't she be Princess Shining? He looked back at the several bailiffs with weapons on their waists, only felt his lips dry, and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Lord Li. When he looked back at Li Yi again, his voice was a little trembling. Li Yi looked at him and said with a smile, "If Lord Lu is tired, go home and take a nap." "Thank you, Lord Li. I'm indeed a little tired. I'm leaving now. I'll visit you another day." After saying that, County Magistrate Lu hurriedly turned around and kicked the nearest runner's ass as he said angrily, "What are you still doing here? Go back." In the astonished and puzzled eyes of the crowd, Several bailiffs were kicked on their butts and all of them were kicked down the stairs one by one. Even the figure of County Magistrate Lu soon disappeared from everyone's sight. This Lu Dio, what the hell is he doing? Li Jianren said angrily, not expecting such a thing to happen. County Magistrate Lu came and returned. This dramatic scene stunned everyone for a long time. Qin Yu cupped his fists forward and said, I admire you, I admire you. I didn't expect the Jingqing magistrate to be Li Xianbua's man. Li quickly shook his head and said, you can eat whatever you want but you can't say whatever you want. Young Duke Qin, you have to take responsibility for what you say. Impudent. Prince Duanyang snorted coldly and said, how dare you cover up a criminal and collude with an official of the imperial court? What Duke Duanyang? Li looked at Prince Duanyang and said, I'm afraid that Duke Duanyang can't accuse me of this. We're all smart people. You all know what kind of person young Duke Qin is. It's not enough for him to flirt with an innocent family once. Now he even wants to put the blame on others. Let me make it clear. Today none of you can take him away. Qin Yu's face was gloomy, and the others looked at each other. This time they really shed all pretenses of cordiality. Bastard. King Hui's fief was in Chuzhou, and Prince Duanyang was like a crown prince in Chuzhou. He had never been treated so arrogantly. He pointed at Li Yi's nose and scolded. Li looked at him and said seriously, I'm a person who can't stand being scolded. If you scold me I'll hit you. Prince Duanyang was stunned for a moment. Instead of getting angry he laughed. Hit me? Do you have the guts? Li Jianren took a step back, Cui Shixing took a step back, and Chen Lisan took a step back to avoid being affected. There used to be two people who had the same idea as Prince Duanyang. Among them, one was lying at home for 2 days and the other was lying for 2 months. One was standing in front of them now, and the other was still in the prince's mansion. In terms of status, which one of them was inferior to Prince Duanyang? Guards. Royal Prince Duanyang coldly snorted and said, go in and arrest those 2 women. Send them to the government office. I want to see how bold this official Li is. Let's see if he dares to stop us. He looked at Li Yi and said with a sneer, I am helping the imperial court to arrest criminals. If someone tries to stop me and gets hurt, don't blame others. This was a threat. Prince Duanyang believed that with such a legitimate reason, he would be confident even when facing the emperor. Li took a step back, walked into the room and said, I advise Prince Duanyang not to come in. The playboys behind Prince Duanyang were vigilant. Although they said so from their expressions, they all hoped that Prince Duanyang would go in. Could it be that he really planned to beat up Royal Prince Duanyang here? Did he really think that he could be lawless because he had intermittent hysteria? The same reason could be used once, but if it was used a second time many people would not agree. Prince Duanyang sneered, strode into the room and said, I came in, what can you do to me? Li Yi kicked Prince Duanyang's chest and kicked him out of the room. Prince Duanyang's body hit the railing before he fell to the ground. He clutched his chest and his facial features twisted together. He stretched out a hand with difficulty, pointed at Li Yi and said, I take him down. A few armed men rushed into the room and surrounded Li Yi. From the way he had easily kicked the regional king out of the room, they could tell that he had some skills. The few of them placed their hands on the hilts of their swords. Clutching his chest, Royal Prince Duanyang pushed through the crowd and walked in with a gloomy expression. He pulled out a long saber from the waist of a guard and coldly said, harboring a criminal and attempting to assassinate a royal prince. This prince will now bring people to arrest you. If you dare to resist again, don't blame this prince. Qin Yu's expression was as calm as an ancient well. He calmly looked at Li Yi. He was as bold as ever. At this moment Royal Prince Duanyang had been dragged into this. Not only would he not be able to protect the 2 women, but he would also be in a lot of trouble. Zheng Zumo ran over from behind with a pale face. She did not expect things to develop like this. She was about to speak but she saw Li Yi wave his hand and said to Prince Duanyang, swords have no eyes. Prince Duanyang should be careful. Fighting and killing is not good. Can't you just sit down and talk? Talk. Prince Duanyang's chest rose and fell, and his breathing was rapid. It took him a lot of effort to suppress the urge to raise his knife and kill. Li Yi sighed, pointed at Prince Duanyang who was holding a knife, and the aggressive people next to him, and said to the gray-robed old man, protect him. The old man nodded and opened a window behind him. Prince Duanyang's expression froze, and he suspected that he had heard wrong. Qin Yu's expression changed slightly, and he raised his head to look at Li Yi. Seeing that his expression was still calm, he did not know why, but the feeling in his heart that something bad was about to happen became stronger. What did he just say? Behind them, Cui Shixin asked in confusion. Go home. Li Jinren thought for a moment and said. Go home. Cui Shixin shook his head. Things had already come to this, did he think he could still leave? Chapter 540. Haha, I'd like to see where you can go. Prince Duanyang sneered with a trace of sarcasm on his face. However, this trace of sarcasm soon turned into doubt and he turned to look downstairs. Rumble. An unusually orderly sound of footsteps suddenly rang in their ears. Looking down the stairs, they saw that the shopkeeper and waiters of the restaurant, as well as the guests downstairs, were all squatting on the ground with their hands over their heads. A group of armored guards filed in through the door. The arrows in the hands of more than 10 soldiers in the front row were already aimed at them. The sharpness of the arrowheads was chilling. Imperial Guards. What's going on? Why are the Imperial Guards here? The more than 10 playboys were immediately scared out of their wits. The Imperial Guards were the Emperor's guards. Their duty was to guard the palace and protect the Emperor. Every time the Imperial Guards appeared, they represented the Emperor's will. Who dared to move at this time? The people upstairs, put down your weapons. A man who looked like a general walked out from the back and looked at them coldly. Clang. Royal Prince Duanyang turned around to look at this scene. His forehead was covered with cold sweat and the saber in his hand fell to the ground. He was terrified but he still didn't know what was going on. Why were the palace guards here? The few servants who were holding weapons naturally squatted on the ground with their hands over their heads. Not to mention them, if they disobeyed, these Imperial Guards even had the power to shoot Prince Duanyang on the spot. Who were they? In the next moment, countless figures appeared in the restaurant. A group of Imperial Guards came up the stairs. Including Qin Yu, a dozen or so hedonistic young masters leaned against the wall. Cold arrows were pointed at them, and they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. I came late to the rescue. Please forgive me, princesses. The guard general walked to the door, knelt on one knee and said in a low voice. Princess? Prince Duanyang only felt that his vision was a little black. He finally knew why County Magistrate Lu just turned around and left. Damn, why was the princess here? What did he do just now? Did he use a saber in front of the princess? And there were 2 of them. At this time, Prince Duanyang was not only a little black. If it weren't for the wall he would have collapsed. Qin Yu's face was also pale. Who would have thought that someone as noble as the princess would actually eat in such a restaurant? If the 2 of them were already in such a state, then the clothes of those whose statuses were lower than theirs were already drenched in cold sweat. They could feel the murderous aura from the guards even when they turned their heads. This time they were afraid that something big had happened. Aya, what are you doing? You can't even let me eat properly. The Tsundra Lolita stood up from her seat and pulled Yongning's hand. She said, how disappointing. Let's go back and eat our braised prawns. Li Yi shook his head. With such a thing happening he probably couldn't eat the braised prawns anymore. Just look at this royal Prince Duanyang and little Duke Qin. Do they have nothing better to do? Why did they have to provoke the 2 princesses? Can't you just sit down and eat? Li Yi felt that Miss Zheng's breathing was a little disordered and her body was trembling a few times. He hurriedly turned around to support her and asked, What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Zheng Zumo waved her hand. After she stood firm she looked at Li Yi and asked, Princess? Princess? Li Yi shrugged, pointed to the 2 little girls and introduced them. Let me introduce you again. This is Princess Shaning and this is Princess Yongning. You, help me a little. Zheng Zumo held Li Yi with one hand and looked at the 2 girls that she couldn't be more familiar with a face full of disbelief. Sinny and Bing Ning, weren't they the children of his distant relatives? How could they become princesses? In other words, the one that she had hugged and kissed and almost fell on the swing was actually the princess? This news was so unexpected and shocking that she couldn't accept it for a while. Xiao Chui, who was on the side, looked even paler than before. She grabbed the corner of Zheng Zumo's clothes, and her body was trembling slightly. Let's go. Li Yi sighed. The outside world was indeed dangerous. A good meal could end up like this. This time he probably wouldn't even be able to go home. When he walked out of the door he looked at Qin Yu and Duanyang who were squatting in the corner and shook his head helplessly. It was simply a sin. Zheng Zumo and Xiao Chui came out in a daze, and even the matter of young Duke Qin was temporarily forgotten. Outside the Drunken Moon Inn the Imperial Guard General said to Li Yi, Lord Li, this matter concerns Her Royal Highness. Please come with us to the palace. Li Yi nodded and said to the Li family guard standing at the door, Send Miss Zumo back first. Tell the madam that I may come back later. The Imperial Guard General hesitated for a moment and said, "Lord, these two girls?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "This matter has nothing to do with them. Let's forget it." The Imperial Guard General looked at the gray-robed old man beside him. Seeing him nod, he didn't speak any more. Zheng Zimo's mind was a bit chaotic at the moment. She really should go back and think about it. When she was sent away by the guard, her expression was still a bit blank. When Li Yi and the two princesses returned to the palace, they could take a carriage, but the others didn't have this treatment. The distinguished young Duke Qin, Duanyang, and more than 10 famous playboys in the capital were escorted by the imperial guards through the streets and alleys. Could be said that they were in the limelight. Since it concerned the two princesses, it naturally couldn't be treated lightly. The imperial guards had already entered the palace to report to the emperor. At the same time, news was also spread to some of the noble families in the capital. In the Ministry of Revenue, an assistant minister with the surname Zheng had just come out from the minister's office with a slightly excited expression on his face. Some of the news that the minister had just informed him made him feel quite proud. Everyone knew that the Ministry of Revenue was in short supply of mathematics talents. After all the twists and turns, his son had finally entered the mathematics school. If he wanted to work in the Ministry of Revenue in the future, it might be much easier to use his connections. When the king of Shu ascended the throne, the Zheng family, which had suffered a great disaster before, would probably rise again. Thinking of this, his face naturally revealed a trace of a smile. However, this smile did not last for long as a person hurriedly ran in from outside. After seeing him, the person said in a panic, "Lord Zheng, something bad has happened. The young master has been captured by the imperial guards." What? Hearing this, Assistant Minister Zheng's expression changed drastically. He immediately asked, "What is going on? How did he offend the imperial guards?" The person shook his head and said, "This subordinate doesn't know the specifics. I only know that His Majesty is very angry." Including Duanyang, young Duke Qin, and more than 10 young masters of noble families, they are all kneeling in front of the palace gates. His Majesty? His Majesty is very angry? Assistant Minister Zheng's expression became even more terrified. He immediately said, "Prepare the carriage, we're going to the Qin residence." At this moment, there was more than one person who had the same reaction as Assistant Minister Zheng. In the Duke Qin residence, a woman said in a panic, "What? Li Xin has been captured? Master, you have to save Li Xin." Qin Chang's expression was gloomy. After a moment, he strode out of the residence. "Prepare the carriage, I want to enter the palace." In the Qin residence, Minister Qin frowned as he looked at the panicking Assistant Minister Zheng. However, he didn't know what exactly had happened. Not long after, a carriage drove out of the Qin residence and headed in the direction of the palace gates. More than 100 imperial guards escorting more than 10 hedonistic sons through the streets was a shocking scene. The commoners of the capital had never seen such a scene in their entire lives. Within an hour, all sorts of rumors had spread throughout the capital. At the same time, many of the wealthy families and officials' residences were in an even greater uproar. Chapter 541. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Li looked up at Emperor Jing and said helplessly, "Your Majesty, if you look at me like that, I will be embarrassed." Emperor Jing raised his eyebrows and said angrily, "You will be embarrassed?" His words were a bit too much. It was human nature to be embarrassed. Unless one's skin was thick to a certain extent, everyone would have this kind of feeling. Was the old emperor scolding him in a roundabout way? What a heartless guy. Over the past year he had helped him a lot. Not to mention the matter of Tianfa, when the people of the Qi kingdom came from far away to humiliate the Jing kingdom, who helped the old emperor to save the face of the Jing kingdom when the Jing kingdom was at a disadvantage. When there was a shortage of mathematicians in the kingdom of Jing, who had spared no effort and stayed up all night to compile teaching materials. Who had spared no effort to cultivate a group of qualified mathematicians. Had they reaped any benefits from this? Besides, when his eldest daughter was besieged by the courtiers, who tried all kinds of ways to help her solve those troubles and recruited a large number of younger brothers, younger sisters. Even his 2 youngest daughters, he had accompanied them for 2 months and played with them. One of them even wanted to rely on him for a lifetime. Was it easy for him? The royal family was a group of ungrateful wolves. Li Yi used his own experience to prove that this sentence was correct. "Isn't this a trap you set for them?" Emperor Jing stood up and looked at him and asked. Li Yi was stunned and said, "I have no grudge against them. Why would I harm them?" "No grudge?" Emperor Jing was stunned and said, "You said no grudge? Li Yi thought for a while, and it seemed that there were some grudges. However, how long had he been in the capital? How many enemies could he have made? It was nothing more than the king of Shu, the Chui family, the Chen family, the Qin family, Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works, Assistant Minister Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Rights. There were only dozens of people recorded in the small notebook. Was it a lot? The reason why he had offended these people was because he wanted to help the old emperor, but now he was blaming himself instead. He was an ingrate. Li Yi said with some grievance, "Your Majesty, you can go and ask. I just took the two princesses out for a meal today. I didn't provoke anyone, but I encountered such a thing. I'm also very helpless." Jing Di looked back at the gray-clothed old man in the corner. The old man nodded helplessly. This time it was really not County Magistrate Li's fault. The princess left the palace secretly, so she couldn't easily reveal her identity. In addition to hiding the princess's identity, County Uncle Li was really bullied by others this time. This minister of offerings in the palace would naturally not lie to him. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi with a puzzled expression. Was it really not him who was causing trouble this time? He was indeed a little depressed just now. The two princesses leaving the palace had been hidden from all the courtiers. After this incident, he was afraid that this matter could not be hidden anymore. There would be many people making a big fuss about this matter. He was afraid that he would have a headache for a while. At this moment, seeing Li Yi's expression, he had some doubts about his guess, but he also felt a little guilty. Forget it, forget it. You can go. In order to cover up the embarrassment, Jing Di waved his hand and said, "I'll leave." Li Yi sighed and turned to walk out of the hall. His back looked bleak and lonely, which made Jing Di feel a little more guilty. The gray-clothed old man behind him respectfully asked, "Your Majesty, Prince Duanyang and young Duke Qin?" Jing Di's face turned cold and said coldly, "They offended the princess. Let them kneel first. 10 hours later each of them will be punished with 40 floggings. Let the palace guards execute it." When Li Yi walked out of the palace gate with his hands behind his back, he looked to the side with interest. More than a dozen people were facing the palace wall and kneeling uniformly. It was a different scene. Unfortunately, it was already autumn. If it was 3 months ago when the summer was the hottest, they would not kneel much. They would just kneel here for 4 hours and then they could ask someone to collect the corpses. What a pity, what a pity. He sighed. In the distance, Fang was already sitting in the carriage waiting for him. The weather was not hot, but the foreheads of Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin and other playboys were full of sweat. No one thought that there were two princesses sitting in that room. If they had known, they would not have dared to use a knife in front of the little princess even if they had 10 more guts. Just now, their lord had been here and was now in the palace asking to see the emperor. This time it was impossible to kill them, but they were afraid that they would lose a layer of skin. Thinking of County Earl Li, who had been calm from the beginning to the end, everyone could not help but gnash their teeth with hatred. He simply dug a pit in advance, waiting for them to jump into it. From the first time he met young Duke Qin, he had been guiding them step by step. Later he attacked Prince Duanyang and deliberately angered him. It must be his plan. After sorting out this matter in their hearts, everyone was secretly shocked. This seemingly harmless County Earl Li was really too sinister. After this matter, more than half of the people present listed him as a person who could never be offended in this life. At this time, in the Hall of Diligent Government, a large number of people knelt down. "I failed to teach my son well and offended the princess. Please punish me, Your Majesty." An official knelt on the ground and said loudly, "I am guilty." There were more than a dozen people kneeling in the hall. At this moment they all knelt on the ground and said loudly. Prime Minister Qin, who was noble, stood quietly with Prime Minister Shen and did not speak. "You have taught a group of good sons." Emperor Jing glanced at the crowd and said coldly, "Flirting with good families, distorting black and white, threatening important officials of the imperial court with a knife, and frightening the two princesses. I would like to ask who gave them the courage to do so." It was rare for His Majesty to be angry. Everyone was silent and did not dare to speak again. Emperor Jing looked at them and said coldly, "Are the laws of our Jing kingdom just decorations in their eyes?" The officials could only bow their heads and listen to the scolding. Their children had made such a big mistake. It was nothing to be scolded by His Majesty. It would be good if they were scolded, but it would be a big problem if they were not scolded. 40 floggings were personally carried out by the imperial guards. It was estimated that they would have to lie at home for at least 10 days or half a month before they could get up. Of course, this was already His Majesty's mercy for the sake of many of them. Unfortunately, It was said that the boy of the Qin family had just recovered from a serious injury. If these 40 floggings were carried out, he would probably die. Of course, His Majesty Prime Minister Qin still had to take into account. He would not be beaten to death, but at least he would be half dead. After a quarter of an hour, Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "Take him back and discipline him well. If there is a next time, I will not let him off so easily." "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your mercy." After hearing the punishment, everyone felt relieved and quickly said. At this moment, an assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, who had just stood up, suddenly stepped forward and asked, "May I ask Your Majesty, why are Princess Shaoning and Princess Yongning not in the palace but in a small restaurant in the capital?" As soon as these words came out, the expressions of several people immediately changed. Now that this matter was brought up, had Assistant Minister Chen lost his mind? Emperor Jing raised his eyebrows and said, "Princess Yongning is suffering from an illness of loss of her soul. These days she has been receiving treatment outside the palace. For the sake of her safety, this matter should not be made public." No one could find fault with this reason. Assistant Minister Qin nodded and raised his head to ask, "What about Princess Shaoning?" Emperor Jing glanced at Assistant Minister Qin and took a sip of the tea on the table. He waved his hand at Changda and asked, "How many floggings did I say they should be flogged?" "Reporting to Your Majesty, 40 floggings." Changda bowed and said, "The two princesses have suffered quite a fright this time. 40 floggings is still too little. Change it to 80. Emperor Jing ordered and then turned his head to ask, "What did Assistant Minister Chen just say?" "I have nothing to say." Assistant Minister Chen's expression changed. He gritted his teeth and lowered his head as he spoke. Imperial Father, quickly come and see what our new bracelets are like. Isn't it beautiful?" The two princesses, who had suffered quite a fright, ran in from outside hand in hand. The proud Lolita ran in front of Emperor Jing and waved her hand, her expression extremely proud. Chapter 542. Not long after, several courtiers walked out of the Hall of Diligent Government with their heads drooped. This time, because of his disappointing children, he was scolded by His Majesty, and his mood was extremely depressed. However, even if His Majesty did not punish them, they would still teach those boys a lesson. Rushing into the place where Her Royal Highness ate with a knife, they would say, "You mother ** king want to rebel, even I don't dare to do that." As for why the two little princesses were in the restaurant in the capital, was it important? Everyone glared at Assistant Minister Qin vaguely. Everyone knew that it was not appropriate for the two little princesses to leave the palace, but he actually mentioned it to His Majesty at this time. Was he stupid? However, His Majesty's reaction just now was far beyond everyone's expectations. "His Majesty, how did it become like this?" Finally, someone could not help but ask the person beside him with a complicated tone. The emperor had always actively listened to the reasonable suggestions of the court officials. It was not in accordance with the rules of etiquette to allow the young princess to leave the palace. It was normal for an official from the Ministry of Rights or an imperial censor to bring up this matter, but they believed that if Assistant Minister Chen had said one more word, it wouldn't just be a matter of 80 strokes. How could the once wise and selfless His Majesty, how could he, become like this? This was not the His Majesty they were familiar with. The few of them shook their heads and sighed helplessly. This matter could not be considered as truly over. In the shortest time possible, they had to inform all their close colleagues or the censors that they could not mention the matter of the little princess leaving the palace during the morning court session the next day. 80 floggings was enough. At this time, only Prime Minister Qin was left in the Hall of Diligent Government. "Is there anything else, Minister Qin?" Emperor Jing looked down and asked him. "Your Majesty." Prime Minister Qin opened his mouth. Okay, no need to say more. I understand." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "I will ask them to be more lenient. However, Qin Yu is the leader of this matter. If I let him go alone, I am afraid the others will not be convinced. He can be spared from death, but he cannot escape punishment." "I thank Your Majesty." Prime Minister Qin let out a long sigh and bowed deeply. Emperor Jing looked at his back as he left. His back was slightly stooped. He sighed and said, "It's time to discipline this child of the Qin family. The people are already complaining about his behavior. Don't let the Qin family's century-old reputation be ruined." Qin Xiang's footsteps paused. There was an unconcealable disappointment on his face. When he stepped out of the hall, his back was even more stooped. There was going to be a lot of excitement in Jingdu today. A few dozen steps away from the entrance of the palace, Gongs and drums could be heard, firecrackers were set off, and red flags were fluttering in the wind. There was a sea of people. The black mass of people stretched as far as the eye could see. Below the palace walls, a dozen or so stools were arranged in a row. The famous hedonistic sons of the capital were sprawled on top of them. Shadows of sticks danced in the air as they wailed in pain. After hearing the emperor's decree, the imperial guards had already conserved some of their strength. Otherwise, if they were to really follow the standard military practice of 80 strokes of the cane, none of these hedonistic sons who had their bodies hollowed out by wine and women would be able to return alive. When it came to flogging, they were very experienced. Whether it was on the buttocks or the back, regardless of whether there were no scars on the outside and dozens of strokes of the cane could still kill them, or whether it was a wretched appearance but in reality, it was just a superficial wound. They could recuperate at home for half a month before being able to walk. These were all things that needed to be paid attention to. This time, it was naturally impossible to beat those hedonistic sons to death. However, the pain was so great that they would probably be unable to forget it for the rest of their lives. With every stroke of the cane, the cries became even more tragic. What is going on? Who are those people? You don't even know? The news has long spread in the capital. A dozen hedonistic sons of hedonistic sons have taken liberties with innocent people. They actually dared to take liberties with Her Royal Highness. Aren't they courting death? I already said that this group of people have done all kinds of bad things. Sooner or later they will know who is stronger. They deserve it. The commoners liked to see this kind of excitement. Wasn't it fun to eat melon seeds of different flavors while listening to the screams? Naturally, there were also rows of carriages parked at the side. The carriages had soft cushions on them, and the outside of the carriages were pasted with the insignia of various families. They were all well-known figures in the capital. However, today, while their heads were still there, their faces were completely lost. My pitiful children. His Majesty is so cruel. He has already asked Imperial Consort Shui to plead for mercy on their behalf. Why is there still no movement from the palace? Listening to the screams outside, there were even sounds of sobbing, cursing, sighing, and the sound of eating melon seeds coming from within some of the carriages. Bah! Outside a carriage, a middle-aged man spat out the skin of a melon seed. He looked at the people under the palace wall who were being beaten with a cane. His face showed an expression of interest. Wu Heir, do you think the red dates or the garlic flavor tastes better? A large man beside him scratched his head and said, "Fifth Master, I think the 5-spice flavor tastes better." The middle-aged man dragged out his voice. Seeing this, the large man immediately said, "The garlic flavor. Of course the garlic flavor tastes better." The middle-aged man threw the bag in his hand over and said, "Since the garlic flavor tastes better, these are all for you." The large man's face showed a bitter expression. He glanced around and his eyes suddenly lit up. He said, "Fifth Master, it seems that the beating is over. Should we go over and bring the little Duke over?" In reality, beside the surrounding carriages, countless figures had already jogged over to the palace wall and carried their young masters back. They had him lie down on the soft cushion that had been prepared in the carriage. That fifth master waved his hand somewhat dispiritedly. 2 men quickly ran over and carried the fainted Chinyu back. When they saw a certain part of his body, even though they were made of iron, they couldn't help but suck in a breath. This was simply beaten to a pulp. Naturally, the 2 of them deeply sympathized with their little duke's experience. The outside world was still too dangerous for the little duke. How good would it be to be grounded at home? At least he wouldn't be beaten into a sieve. Wu Heir glanced at the inside of the carriage and covered his eyes. He secretly sighed and said, "What a sin." After the few playboys were punished, they were quickly carried back. There was no more excitement to watch. The people also dispersed in disappointment, leaving behind a ground full of melon seed shells. At the entrance of the Hall of Diligent Government, Changda bowed to the woman in the palace dress in front of him and said, "Your Highness, please go back." The 2 little princesses were frightened today. His Majesty is comforting them inside. He won't see anyone. After a while, looking at the sky, Concubine Shui estimated that there was already a result outside the palace. Concubine Shui shook her head. She was afraid that what her younger sister had asked of her could not be done. At this time, in the Hall of Diligent Government, the proud Lolita excitedly told Emperor Jing about what she had seen and heard these days. She danced with joy. "Father, you don't know. Sir's rocking cart is very fun. And that uncle is very strong. Also, I went fishing with Sir. Those stinky fish actually don't eat candied haws. And I also have a rabbit that I keep at Sir's house. I want to see it in a few days. Emperor Jing held Yongning in his arms and touched Princess Shaning's head. He asked with a smile, "You weren't frightened today, right?" The proud Lolita shook her head and said angrily, "I wasn't frightened. It's just that I haven't eaten enough. I said that I would go to Sir's house to eat braised prawns, sweet and sour carp, braised lion's head. Sir also said that he would take us out to barbecue tomorrow." Seeing that his daughter kept talking about Sir, Emperor Jing was depressed. What was so good about Li? Why did his two daughters like him so much? At this moment, the proud Lolita seemed to think of something again. She mysteriously attached herself to Emperor Jing's ear and said, "Father, in 2 years, can you issue a decree to betroth Shaning to Sir?" The expression on Emperor Jing's face froze. After a while, outside the Hall of Diligent Government, Changde heard the movement coming from inside the hall. He looked back and shook his head slightly. It seemed that His Majesty was really angered by those playboys this time. Otherwise, how could he even use the word beast? Chapter 543. The maids of the Li family were discussing in the yard which young master had his buttocks smashed in front of the palace gate yesterday. They didn't know whether they had eaten a bear's heart or a leopard's gall. It was fine if they bullied good people in daily life, but now they even dared to flirt with Her Royal Highness. They deserved to be beaten to death. Xiao Huan was usually very interested in the gossips in the capital, but today she had a bitter face. She had eaten too many melon seeds in the past 2 days, and her tongue was blistered and painful. In just a short while she had already drunk 2 cups of fruit juice. Li was a little bored in the past 2 days. The Heroes' Conference was approaching and Mississippi Lu was a little busy. Many real martial arts masters also came, so he took Rui to hold the fort. It seemed that he was determined to win the position of the chief of the Wulin League. The 2 little princesses had actually run out of the palace. Although for some reason the courtiers and censors seemed to have reached some sort of tacit agreement. No one made a big fuss about this matter. However, it was unlikely that Yongning and Shouning would be able to leave the palace in a short period of time. These bastards. There were still a few days before Yongning could return to the palace. Now they suffered a big loss. He had to find a chance to talk to the old emperor and see if he could make up for it. However, this matter had to be put off for a few days. These days, every time he thought of the old emperor, he would have an ominous premonition. It was better to see him less these days. Today he had to go to Miss Zheng's place to see her. She must have been frightened by what happened yesterday. When he was about to go out, he met an unexpected person at the door. County Magistrate Lu smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you, Lord Li. If it weren't for you yesterday, I'm afraid I would have been in danger." Speaking of which, half a year ago, it was Li Yi who called himself this official. In less than a year, their positions had been reversed. "Someone bring the gift here." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand behind him and then said to Li Yi, "It's just a small gift to show my respect." Although it was a meager gift, considering his family's wealth, it was considered a huge loss. Thinking back to yesterday's events, it was too dangerous. If it had been him who had led the bailiffs into the room, he would have ended up the same way as those foppish nobles. However, he did not have such a deep background in the capital, so the situation would have been even more serious. Li Yi's advice yesterday was no less than a life-saving grace to him. 2 princesses. After receiving the exact news yesterday, he was really shocked and broke into a cold sweat. "We're all on the same side. Lord Lu, you're treating me like an outsider." Li Yi smiled and waved his hand. After he came to this world, he had spent the first few days in Qing'an Prefecture. Thus, when he saw Lu Yi and County Magistrate Lu in Jingdo, he felt closer than other people. What's more, County Magistrate Lu's position as the capital magistrate was beneficial to him. County Magistrate Lu said hurriedly, "Etiquette is necessary." Since he said so, Li Yi naturally couldn't refuse. When the time came, he would tell Uncle Li to send someone to visit County Magistrate Lu's mansion. The standard of the gift would be the same as this one. Li Yi stretched out his hand and said with a smile, "Lord Lu, come in and have a seat." County Magistrate Lu could see that Li Yi was going out. Although he wanted to go in for a cup of tea and improve their relationship, he couldn't disturb him now. He cupped his hands and said, "I only want to thank you in person for your great kindness. I won't disturb you anymore, Lord Li." The guests who came to the Li family all had a good habit of only giving gifts but not entering the door. They didn't even invite them in, so they didn't even have to pay for a cup of tea. Li couldn't help but start to think whether it was because the feng shui of this mansion was too good. County Magistrate Lu also left in a hurry without entering the door. Li shook his head and called Feng, followed by a few guards of the Li family, to the direction of the capital. After being trained by second granduncle for a period of time, Fang's strength had improved by leaps and bounds. Even the carefully selected guards in the imperial palace couldn't withstand a single punch from him. The gray-robed old man beside Yongning had stayed here for 2 months. In the beginning he could easily defeat Fang with a wave of his sleeve. Later he would hide from him when he saw him. Later, according to him, if it was a life-and-death fight, he could take Fang's life within 30 moves. But if it was an ordinary fight, this old man wouldn't be able to withstand a few blows from him. His skills were getting better and better, but his character was getting more and more cowardly. A few days ago he was discovered by his mother-in-law for hiding some money and was not allowed to enter the mansion for 2 days. He became the laughingstock of the mansion. Sitting in the carriage, Fang asked while driving, "Young master, are you going to Miss Zheng's place again?" Li raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean by again?" Only then did Fang realize that he had asked the wrong question, so he corrected himself. "Young master, are you going back to Miss Zheng's place today?" Climbing into the carriage again, Fang sighed and leaned against the carriage. A rare trace of disappointment appeared on his face as he asked, "Young master, have you never thought of taking a concubine? Why do you want to take Lil Hong back?" Li looked at him and asked. Fang shook his head and said, "There's nothing between me and Lil Hong." Li curled his lips. Perhaps even Fang himself didn't believe his own words. There was nothing. There was nothing about running to the jadeite courtyard every 2 or 3 days. There was nothing about hiding some money to buy gifts for her. If there was nothing, how could a rough man's mind become so delicate? Who was he trying to fool? Fang suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Yi, asking seriously, "Young master, have you never thought of taking Miss Zheng back? And that Miss Ruoqing, I don't believe that you can't tell that they like you." Li Yi's expression froze. Rui still had a knot in her heart that she couldn't get over. Although she said so, if he really did that, what kind of position would he put her in? Although it was uncertain what would happen in the future based on the current way of getting along, it was the most important. He looked up at Fang. This wasn't important. What was important was this guy really Fang? Although his memory of old Fang was no longer limited to the simple and honest man who gave them the pheasants that he had hunted with great difficulty and gave them to his family, the man in front of him looked like he had experienced the vicissitudes of life, worry, wisdom, and a certain emotion that seemed to have settled after seeing through the affairs of the world. Was this really old Fang? "Fang, you've changed." Li looked at him for a long time and said with a sigh, "Young master, people will change." Fang looked at him and said, "You will change, I will change, eldest miss will change, second miss will also change, all of us will change." At this moment, Fang was very much like a philosopher. Li suddenly felt that he had underestimated Fang, underestimated everyone. "Young master, don't talk, let me be alone." Li waved his hand, his voice was indescribably tired. Li always came to this small courtyard during the day, so he couldn't see Ruoqing very often. But Miss Zheng was always there. As the chief designer, she only needed to draw in the room so she didn't have to run around. Today she wasn't in the room but sitting at the stone table in the courtyard, staring at the swing under the tree in a daze. Li let out a sigh and sat opposite her. Zheng Zimel looked up at him and didn't say anything. "Fang, this bastard, made me think about life with just a few words, but I went to the jade courtyard to talk about life with Little Red." After a moment of silence, Li felt the atmosphere was a little awkward, so he looked at Miss Zheng and said, "How about, you sing a song?" Zheng Zimel had learned a lot of new songs these days which were all taught by Yongning. Maybe she also felt the atmosphere was a little awkward, so she asked, "What do you want to sing?" Li bowed his head and thought for a moment. After a moment he looked up at her. "How about 18 touches?" Chapter 544. What did you say? Zheng Zimel looked up at Li Yi, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. 18 what? 18 turns. Li looked at her and asked doubtfully, "Haven't you heard of it?" "Let me sing a few lines for you." He cleared his throat and there was an explosive sound. "Yo, the descendant of the mountain, love the sun." Clang. In the kitchen, Xiao Chui, who was washing the dishes, was scared out of her wits by the sudden shout outside. The bowl she had just washed fell to the ground and shattered. In the courtyard, Zheng Zimel's face darkened. Before Li Yi sang the next line, she decisively covered his mouth. "This is a folk song from our hometown. It seems a little wild and not suitable for you to sing." Li Yi gasped. He was almost choked to death by her just now. "Isn't your hometown in Qing'an Prefecture?" Zheng Zimel glanced at him. "I'm talking about the hometown in my dream." "Oh, that's not important." Li Yi waved his hand and said, How about I teach you 2 songs from my hometown? One is called The Most Dazzling Ethnic Style, and the other is called Little Apple. Listen to it, it's quite nice. This time, Li Yi's mouth was covered before he could even make a sound. He was a little regretful. If the middle-aged women in this world also danced in the square, he would definitely build a few more big squares in the capital for free. Zheng Zimo looked at him and asked with some anger in her tone, "Didn't you say that Xini and Bing Ning are the children of your relatives?" The 2 little girls were gone, and Miss Zheng was not even willing to sing. It was time to reflect on herself. Yes, the surname Li is one family in the world. Within 500 generations there must be some relatives. Li Yi thought this explanation was perfect. Zheng Zimo glared at him again. After coming back yesterday she recovered from the shock and thought about it carefully. Naturally she could understand why Li Yi had concealed their identities. But yesterday in the Drunken Moon Tower, she was really scared and naturally had some complaints about him. Xiao Chui did not even dare to sleep alone last night. She spent the whole night asking her if they would be arrested because she had pinched the princess's face. Would they punish her for being disrespectful? Of course there were other reasons for her anger. Princess Yongning's words had disturbed her for many days, but Xni didn't say anything as if nothing had happened. In fact, she had been suppressing her anger recently. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "You don't have to worry. The princess is not that scary. She will still be the same as before. Just pretend that you don't know anything about this." Ordinary people had a natural fear of the royal family. If they were to be punished for being disrespectful to the royal family, then even if they had a few hundred heads, it would not be enough to chop them off. Instead of worrying about this, it was better to worry about whether that damn pervert Qin Yu would secretly play some tricks. But thinking about it, it was not very likely. He heard that in front of the palace gate yesterday, he was beaten unconscious on the spot. Li guessed that the old emperor had held back. Otherwise, the Qin's residents would be preparing for a funeral today. As for the other good-for-nothings, including that royal prince Duanyang, they wouldn't be able to do anything for the next 10 days to half a month. Now that they had all been dealt with, it was likely that the capital would be much quieter in the near future. As one of the 3 heroes of the capital, he was still very competent and inadvertently did something practical for the common people. However, this kind of thing was hard to guarantee. Who knew what the bottom line of those bastards was? The security around the small courtyard still needed to be strengthened. The current situation was no longer the willow leaf stockade. Not to mention the subordinates of Mississippi Lu, just the number of experts recruited from the brothels was already uncountable. They spread out like a net in the capital. As long as one side made a move, countless people would gather in a short period of time. These things were all done by Lu Luo. He was familiar with the Jianghu and had a high prestige. In addition, he alone accounted for more than 90% of the intelligence of the 2 brothers. He could be said to be extremely intelligent and rarely made mistakes. All the affairs were arranged in an orderly manner. Many accidents or sudden incidents could also be handled with a strong hand. Mississippi Lu had never been convinced by anyone and he was one of them. Otherwise, with Mississippi Lu managing the many matters of the hero ranking with passion, it would not take long for the whole thing to collapse. Don't rush to expand the shop. If there are smart people under you, you can train them in the direction of a shopkeeper or a manager. Of course, the foundation must be clean. Don't let Ruoqing run around all day. There is no end to the work. Got it? Zheng Zimo waved her hand impatiently as if she wanted to see him off. She was a little strange today. Li Yi counted the days and calculated a little, and he didn't find it strange anymore. He stood up and said, "Then I'll go back first." Zheng Zimo waved her hand again, stood up and walked into the house. Li Yi sighed. When he walked out the door, Fang was already squatting beside him, waiting. Seeing Li Yi come out, he stood up. "Young master, don't talk." Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand, got into the carriage and said, "Let's go around the city." At this time it was still early before dark. Rui and the others would probably return in 2 to 4 hours. He would go to the brothel and some shops in the capital from time to time. At the door of a brothel in the city, when Li Yi got out of the carriage, another carriage happened to pass by. The elegant young man in the carriage was holding a thick book in his hand and reading it attentively. The carriage slowly drove through a few streets until there were fewer people on the street, and it stopped in front of a high door. The servant at the door was about to go forward to ask, but when he saw the sign on the carriage, his face froze. He immediately stepped forward respectfully and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." The young man got out of the carriage, waved his hand and asked, "Is Prime Minister Qin in the residence?" He just returned. The servant quickly said, "Your Highness, please? Your Highness, have you been reading these days?" After a servant served tea, Prime Minister Qin looked at the king and asked. The king said with a smile, "In the past 2 months, I have been lying in bed with nothing to do, but I have read a lot. Now I am used to it and I can't put it down for a while. It's good to read more." Prime Minister Qin nodded and said, "However, even if it's reading, you need to focus on something. Your Highness should learn more about the mind of an emperor and the way of governing a country. I will send someone to send a few books to you tomorrow." "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin." The king cupped his hands and thanked him. Prime Minister Qin's face showed a thoughtful expression. He paused and said, "I know that your Highness has a grudge against the Earl of Chang'an County, Li Yi. However, he is a talented man. If he is willing to assist you, he will definitely be your greatest help in the future. It's not a big deal to be young and impetuous. I was also young once. Those who achieve great things never care about trifles. I hope your Highness can let bygones be bygones. As for the Earl of Chang'an County, I will fight for it for your Highness. What do you think?" This was the second time that Prime Minister Qin had mentioned this to the King of Shu. After a moment of shock, the king's face lit up and he said, "In the past 2 months, I have been thinking about it and felt a lot of emotions. That's exactly what I wanted to do. Thank you, Prime Minister Qin." Prime Minister Qin nodded and a hint of relief appeared on his face. The King of Shu suddenly changed the topic and asked, "I've heard about what happened yesterday. Brother Qin Yu, he didn't sleep last night and just fell asleep." Speaking of this matter, Prime Minister Qin's face showed disappointment and disappointment again. The King of Shu cupped his hands and said, "In that case I won't bother you anymore. I'll visit you in 2 days. Your Highness, if you have nothing to do these days, you might as well pay a visit to the families of generals and other officials' mansions. After all, there are some things that even I don't have the right to do." "I understand." "Well, Prime Minister Qin, you don't have to see me out." At the gate of Qin's mansion, the King of Shu bowed to Prime Minister Qin again and turned to get on the carriage. "Fortune or misfortune, your Highness has really grown up this time," Prime Minister Qin said softly and turned to step into the mansion. Inside the carriage, the King of Shu had a faint smile on his face. After a while, the smile on his face disappeared and a strange light flickered in his eyes. He asked, "Have you found out the details of those 2 women?" "Your Highness, I have." A voice came from outside the carriage. The King of Shu smiled again and unconsciously rubbed his fingers. He picked up a book beside him and read it attentively. Chapter 545. Every time he planned to go to the palace, he would have a bad feeling in his heart. Therefore, Li Yi stayed at home for the past few days. As he sat on the stone bench in the courtyard thinking about life, his eyes were suddenly covered by someone from behind. "Guess who I am?" A strange voice came from behind him. Xiao Huan was not that naughty, Rui would not do such a childish thing, and Mississippi Lu was even more so. Although she purposely pinched her throat, it was not hard to tell that the little devil who had been tormenting him for 2 months was here again. "Let me guess, is it Xiao Huan?" "No," the voice behind him said proudly. "Then is it Duanwu?" Li said again. "Guess again." The arrogant lowly was obviously very proud of herself. This time she did not even try to hide her voice. "Li Bingning, what did you touch with your hand?" Li Yi moved her hand away and asked while rubbing his eyes. "I didn't touch anything." The arrogant lowly said in surprise, "It's just that my mother caught a cold last night, so I just made a bowl of ginger soup for her." "How did you know it was me?" The arrogant lowly was really his nemesis, Li Yi thought as he washed his eyes with water. Using ginger to make people cry was a common method used by the newcomers in the brothel who had no acting skills. Li Yi guessed that the ginger that the arrogant lowly used to make the ginger soup today must be very old. While Li Yi was washing his eyes, the arrogant lowly was playing with the rabbit that she had caught with her own hands with a vegetable leaf. At this time of year, it was really a luxury to feed the rabbit with vegetables. Fortunately, the greenhouse was built earlier this year, so he would not have to eat dried vegetables for the whole winter. "I talked to my father a few days ago," the arrogant lowly suddenly said while holding the rabbit. "What did he say?" Li Yi also asked casually. Li Yi guessed that it was to allow her to leave the palace as she pleased. The old emperor did not put on any airs and did not act like an emperor at all. He was even more indulgent towards the arrogant Lolita. Li Yi was afraid that he would suffer in the future. The proud Lolita said proudly, "I'll tell my father and ask him to betroth me to you in a few years." Clang. Because his hand moved too much, the copper basin fell to the ground. Li Yi's clothes and shoes were all wet. "What did you say?" he asked again, afraid that he had misheard. "I'll ask my father to betroth me to you," the proud Lolita said confidently. Li Yi stood in the courtyard and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. He finally knew where that ominous premonition of the past few days came from. He looked at the palace guards and the gray-robed elders standing outside the courtyard. He wondered if he could make it in time if he ran now. The precocious young lady was very dangerous. Li Yi suddenly lost his sense of security. If she said something even more outrageous in front of the old emperor, he was afraid that he would really have to run. He sighed, picked up the copper basin and walked into the house. He waved at the proud Lolita and said, "Shaning, come over here. Teacher wants to talk to you about something." The proud Lolita left. Before she left, she said that she would come back to see her rabbit in a few days. She also reminded Li Yi that he still owed her a roasted meat. He would make it up to her next time. She was almost gone. Why would he eat roasted meat? Li Yi felt that one day he would be tricked by the proud Lolita to death, unknowingly. At this moment, Fong walked in from outside. He looked at him and asked doubtfully, "Young master, I just heard that someone is going to be betrothed to you. You can't be thinking of asking the emperor to help you, right? If you force it, I'm afraid that eldest miss won't agree." Fong. Li looked at him and asked, "Has anyone recently said that you talk a lot?" "No." Fong shook his head and looked at him. "Little Red said that what I said recently was very reasonable. What do you think, young master?" Li looked at him and said seriously, "From now on, you are not allowed to speak in front of me." Fong nodded and began to gesture something with his hands. What a mess. After a while, Li waved his hand and asked, "What do you want to say?" Old Fong pointed at his mouth with an innocent look on his face. Li took a deep breath and said, "You can say something." Fong nodded and said, "Something has happened at Miss Zheng and Miss Wan's place these days." "What is it?" Li looked at him and asked. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. "What is it?" Li asked again. Fong pointed to his mouth again. Li felt that his temper had become much better recently. He sighed and said, "The few greenhouses in the farm are a bit busy these days. Why don't you come back to help? It's closer to home." Recently, there have been a lot of idlers around Miss Zheng and Miss Wan's place. Recently, a lot of idlers have been appearing around the place where Miss Zheng and Miss Wan live. They seem to be up to no good. I had some men catch a few of them, but they didn't get anything out of them. Later, some experts came. Fortunately, some of the men we sent out were quite strong. 2 of our men were injured. Yesterday, I stayed there for the whole afternoon, but I didn't meet anyone else. Young master, should we send some more men to guard the place? Lao Fong finished his words fluently in one breath. Sure enough, there were still people who didn't know what was good for them. Li Yi's face darkened slightly. He asked, "How many of our people are on the heaven list now?" Fong thought for a while and said, "A dozen." "Please send 2 people over. Send 10 more masters on the earth list." Since Mississippi Lu established the Lu Alliance, the number of women on the heaven list suddenly increased. Those who received guidance from her were extremely respectful to her and Rui. Sometimes, Li was also amazed that there were so many women in the world who were crazy about martial arts. Naturally, they didn't just practice martial arts. Sometimes they would also have some tasks, most of which were related to the brothel. There should be no problem if the masters on the heaven list were to watch them for a while. As for Wan Ruoqing's travel, there was no need to worry at all. As the head of the brothel, she had extraordinary security around her. If they were just ruffians, it would be fine. If someone really went crazy and invited powerful people, it would be guaranteed that nothing would go wrong. It didn't matter who it was for the time being. Anyway, there were only a few people. According to the current situation, they would get revenge sooner or later. As for now, it was all on the king of Shu. By the way, young master, there's one more thing. As if thinking of something, Fong took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and said, "I almost forgot. Someone just sent this, saying that it's from Qin's mansion." Qin's mansion? Li took the paper from him and opened it. After reading it, a look of surprise appeared on his face. He read it again, and the expression on his face was somewhat indescribable. Prime Minister Qin? Why would Prime Minister Qin invite him over? Were they familiar? Was it a trap? Speaking of which, he was indeed not a stranger. Not only did he have a grudge against Qin Yu, but he had also ruined many things for Prime Minister Qin and the King of Shu. It couldn't be said that their hatred was as deep as the sea, but there was still a lot of hatred between them. As a result, the content of this piece of paper was somewhat thought-provoking. It's just 2 women and you still haven't settled them. What do I want you for? The king of Shu looked at the people below and asked lightly. A young man said in fear and trepidation, Your Highness, it's really because there's an expert beside that woman. We can't get close to her. 2 of those idlers had their legs broken, and the experts in the king's mansion also encountered a strong enemy. Their chances of winning were not high, so they had no choice but to retreat. I'll give you another half a month. If you still can't do what I told you, then don't come back. The king of Shu glanced at them, waved his hand and said impatiently. The few people hurriedly retreated as if they had been granted amnesty. The king of Shu looked at a name on the paper in his hand and clenched his fist. The paper was immediately crumpled into a ball. The humiliation that day, I will definitely return it 100 times over. A suppressed and gloomy voice came from the hall, and then there was no more sound. Chapter 546. Sitting in the carriage, Fang said worriedly, Young master, that Qin guy is not a good person. Do we really have to go? What if he brings people to ambush us inside? Won't we be too few? Sitting in the carriage, Li Yi didn't know why Prime Minister Qin invited him to Qin's mansion. Whether it was a trap or some other purpose, he had to go and have a look after receiving the invitation from the Prime Minister. And Prime Minister Qin invited him so openly, so he didn't have to worry about his safety. If something really happened, he would be the one with a bigger headache. In case of any accidents, he originally wanted to let Mississippi Lu accompany him, but she was really busy recently and Rui's identity was not very suitable. After thinking about it, he brought Fang. The carriage stopped in front of Qin's mansion. Li got off, waved his hand and said, Okay, find a place outside and wait. Nothing will happen. A servant of Qin's mansion had already come over and asked respectfully, Are you Mr. Li? Li Yi handed over the invitation in his hand. After the servant saw it, he immediately said, Mr. Li, please. Master is waiting for you inside. The attitude of the servant of Qin's mansion made Li Yi feel a little surprised. It seemed that today was not like what he had imagined. It did not seem to be a punitive expedition against him. After all, he had a deep grudge with the heir to the Qin family. A few days ago he accidentally cheated him a little. It was reasonable for the Qin family to make trouble for him because of these things. Fang and several guards sat under a big tree opposite, glancing at Qin's mansion from time to time. Led by the servant, Li Yi walked through Qin's mansion and looked around. Qin's mansion was not like what he had imagined. Although it was still beyond the reach of ordinary people in terms of scale and other aspects, it was still a little simple for the Prime Minister who was above tens of thousands of people. There were not many maidservants on the way. They were just quietly working, looking a little lifeless. They were not like the maidservants in his family. Although they did a lot of work, they chattered all day and did not look like maidservants. They were the only ones in the capital. Brother Lu's words are too biased. Who said that women enjoy leisure? Men go to war at the border while women weave at home. They farm during the day and spin cotton at night. They work hard day and night. A voice came from the front. He didn't expect that there would be people in the Qin manor who liked to listen to dramas. It was actually Hua Mulan. Li Yi saw a middle-aged man who looked familiar walking over from the front. He was humming a part of the song and it was all in tune. It was not until he saw the man coming from behind that he saw him that he. The man saw Li Yi and was stunned. Then his expression quickly returned to normal. He followed behind the middle-aged man and passed by Li Yi. The middle-aged man took a few steps and suddenly turned around. He pointed at Li Yi and asked the servant, Who is this? Why have I never seen him before? The servant hurriedly replied, Fifth Master, this is Li Yi, County Uncle Li. He is Master's guest. Master is still waiting, so we'll go over first. The fifth master of the Qin clan was stunned. The old master that the servant mentioned was naturally his father. However, there were many guests in the house, but almost all of them took the initiative to visit. With his father's status, it was naturally impossible for him to visit others. However, there were very few people that he personally invited. He was confused for a moment and then realized something else. Li Yi, County Uncle Li? He was stunned for a moment and looked at the man uncertainly. He asked, Did he just say Li Yi, County Uncle Li? The man nodded and said, That's right. Let's go back and have a look. With an excited smile on his face, Fifth Master turned around and walked in the direction where he came from. Fifth Master, aren't you going to watch the play today? The man asked doubtfully. What? There are ready-made plays at home. By the way, is the King of Shu in the young master's room now? Well, not bad. The house is lively today. Seeing Fifth Master striding forward, The man scratched his head with a trace of doubt on his face. Then he shook his head and quickly followed Fifth Master. The Qin's mansion did not seem to be very big. At least it was much smaller than Li Xian's mansion. Li Yi estimated that after 3 or 5 minutes, the servant took him to a hall. He walked in and said, "Master, County Uncle Li is here." The servant was also surprised at this time. Usually when guests came to the mansion, they were the ones waiting for the master. Even the king of Shu was no exception. Today's situation was extremely rare. Li Yi walked in and saw a white-haired old man sitting on the main seat. He was wearing a plain Confucian robe and looked exactly the same as Prime Minister Qin that Li Yi usually saw. "Greetings, Prime Minister Qin." Even though the few times he met Prime Minister Qin could not be called harmonious, the necessary etiquette could not be omitted. The reason why he called himself junior instead of subordinate was that the college was directly under the jurisdiction of the old emperor. Even the Prime Minister had no right to intervene. In fact, he did not have a superior and subordinate relationship with the officials of the court. Prime Minister Qin stretched out his hand and said straightforwardly. There was a short table between the 2 chairs. Li Yi could not sit on the lower seat and shout while talking. After glancing at Prime Minister Qin, he sat on the other chair. "You must be very surprised that I invited you here today, right?" Prime Minister Qin looked at Li Yi and spoke straightforwardly. "It is indeed a little surprising." Li Yi nodded and said, "Serve the tea." Prime Minister Qin gave a rare smile. He did not seem to be in a hurry to get to the main topic. After waving to the door, a servant from the Qin residence walked in. This tea originated in Songzhou and was given by His Majesty. It is the best of the tributes and cannot be tasted normally. Prime Minister Qin was actually in the mood to introduce tea, which made Li Yi even more puzzled. He did not know what medicine the Prime Minister was selling. However, he was not in a hurry. He smiled and said, "In that case I will be in luck today." The servant girl who poured the tea carefully handed a cup of tea to Prime Minister Qin and the other to Li Yi. Her hands were trembling slightly, causing the lid and the cup to collide with each other, making clanking sounds. Seeing this, Li Yi immediately became vigilant. It was just pouring tea, but she was so scared. Could it be that the tea was poisoned? He looked up at the servant and found that her face was covered with a thin veil. Could it be a masked assassin? As Li Yi thought of this, he held the chair with one hand. Prime Minister Qin frowned and asked in a low voice, "What's the matter?" "Master, I'm not feeling well," the servant said with a trembling voice. Prime Minister Qin's face eased and said, "Since you're not feeling well, go back to your room and rest. Tell the housekeeper to get someone else." At this time, Li Yi's face had calmed down. He stood up and said with a smile, "I'm really sorry, I suddenly have to go to the toilet, I don't know." In the current situation, it was not appropriate to say that directly. Prime Minister Qin had already picked up the teacup, but he put it down and said, "People have to go to the toilet, it doesn't matter." Then he looked at the servant and said, "You take Uncle Li to the toilet first." Li Yi smiled apologetically and walked out slowly. The servant put down the tray and walked out behind him. She clenched her fists. Under the thin veil, her expression was indescribable. Chapter 547. A few steps behind Li Yi, the veiled maid lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Uncle Li, the toilet is in front." "Why are you here?" Li Yi turned around and looked at her. The maid's body trembled slightly, and her voice was a little panicked. "Uncle Li, I don't know what you are talking about. I mean, why are you in the capital and in Prime Minister Qin's mansion?" Li Yi stared at her and asked, "Lu Mei, where are your parents?" The maid's body trembled again, but she also knew that she couldn't hide her identity. She slowly took off her veil, and it could be seen that she was pretty, but the scar on her face was extremely eye-catching. And her appearance was not strange to Li Yi. "Dead, all dead." She looked complicated and said in a sad voice, "On the way to the capital, I encountered bandits and my parents died. I was saved by a passing caravan. Later, I had no choice but to stay here because the steward of Qin's mansion pitted me." Li Yi looked at the woman in front of him. She was young, but her face was full of vicissitudes. He couldn't connect her with the arrogant girl in Willow Leaf Village a year ago. If he remembered correctly, this girl named Lu Mei should be the daughter of Rui's third uncle. When she was in Willow Leaf Village, she didn't get along with Xiao Huan and the others, but it was mostly expressed in words of dissatisfaction and cynicism. Naturally, there was no deep hatred between them. Later, because of the matter of the Lulin gang, Rui's uncles took money from their families, left Willow Leaf Village, and settled down in their own homes in order to avoid trouble. It was strange that after that day, Li never saw them again until he saw Lu Mei here. In that case, third uncle and third aunt were no longer in this world. When Li recalled, he could only remember that third uncle was a skinny man who didn't talk much and seemed to be afraid of his wife. Third aunt was quite powerful. She could stand at the door and argue with second aunt for an hour without losing. But now, too many things had happened in this 1 year. To him these were all very distant memories. The enmity with the Lu clan had been reduced to dust a long time ago. Li looked at her, thought for a moment and asked, "What are your plans for the future?" "Plan?" A smile appeared on Lu Mei's face, but it was uglier than crying. I'm already like this, what other plans can I have? I'm pretty good right now." Li looked at her again, shook his head and walked back the way he came. Lu Mei turned around. Even after his figure disappeared, she stood there for a long time, her face ashen. She could still remember that one day about a year ago when her mother came back from outside, she didn't seem very happy. Later, she learned that Sister Rui snatched a husband from outside, which ruined some of their plans. She remembered that her mother had been thinking about their 2 acres of land for a long time. In the beginning, she had seen the husband of the stronghold a few times. Her impression of him was that he was thin and weak, but he was very handsome. At that time she sometimes thought that she wanted to marry someone like him, who looked comfortable and different from the other people in the village, but he had to be rich. Later she gradually realized that the scholar was amazing. He could write poems, teach and earn money. Everyone said that Sister Rui found a treasure. At that time she was actually a little envious. Later when he sold candied haws, the family also sold candied haws. Later he became the county magistrate, and the situation in Willow Leaf Village changed. Later, she left the village with her parents and went to a neighboring county. After settling down, she didn't deliberately ask for news there. Later, she made some money selling candied haws and wanted to come to Jingdo to live with her relatives and continue the candied haws business. Who would have thought that something like that would happen on the road? Later, that relative also. During those days she suffered a lot before she came to the Qin family. Finally, she had a place where she could shelter herself from the wind and rain. Although she was often ordered around, she didn't ask for anything now. She had once thought about marrying a handsome young man, but this thought hadn't appeared in a long time. Then she heard some news. The Count of Chang, and the Emperor's favorite, one of the 3 heroes of Jingdo, had defeated the people of the Qi kingdom. Even her little duke had suffered a lot at his hands. Every time she thought of this, her heart would become somewhat complicated. If they hadn't left that day, would things have been different? However, there were no ifs in this world. She touched the scar on her face, put on her veil again and silently left with her head down. Meeting Lu Mei in Qin Manor was beyond Li Yi's expectations. She could be considered an old friend. If Rui or Xiao Huan learned of this news, he didn't know what they would do. The old grievances of the past were not worth mentioning now. However, this was Qin Manor. If he acted too special toward her, it would not be a good thing for her. Right now this was all he could do. When he walked back, he coincidentally ran into a servant of Qin Manor and asked him for directions. Only then did he realize that he had gone the wrong way. He walked back another 30 to 50 feet and disappeared behind a moon door. "Miss May?" The man who had led the way scratched his head and nodded slightly. "Wu Er, why aren't you done yet?" A voice came from nearby. Wu Er hurriedly replied, I'm coming. He glanced in a certain direction, turned around and ran over with quick steps. "I've made Prime Minister Qin wait a long time." Li walked into the hall and raised his hands in a salute. "No problem." Prime Minister Qin waved his hand and didn't seem to mind at all. He said, "The tea might be getting cold. I'll have someone make another cup." Li waved his hand and said, "No need to trouble yourself. I don't usually drink tea." He rarely drank tea. As for the tea of Qin Manor, he couldn't drink it. Who knew if there was something else added to it? He wasn't measuring the heart of a gentleman with his own mean measure. Perhaps Prime Minister Qin couldn't do such a thing, but some people could. "What's the matter, Prime Minister Qin?" After Li sat down again, he asked directly. Prime Minister Qin took a sip of tea unhurriedly and asked casually, "Mr. Li is a rare young talent in our Jing kingdom. What do you think of the recent political affairs?" Li was stunned for a moment. Then he shook his head and said, "I haven't seen it. I've never been to the court." Prime Minister Qin's hand, which was putting down the teacup, froze slightly. In fact, he wanted to recruit Li Yi today. From his observation in the past few months, Li Yi could really be called the first person among the young generation in the Jing kingdom. He was favored by the emperor and was highly valued by the emperor. Besides, he had a close relationship with the prince of Prince Ning, Li Xian. Prince Ning's influence in the court couldn't be underestimated. What's more, Prince Li Xian had the support of the Wang family and other big families. If he could make Prince Li Xian be loyal to the Prince of Shu, he wouldn't have to worry about it. Of course, this kind of thing couldn't be said clearly. He did want to say a few words in a roundabout way, but Mr. Li's first sentence ended the conversation. He was not prepared for it and his thoughts were disrupted. At this moment he didn't know how to continue asking. Chapter 548. In a room of an exquisite small building in Qin's mansion, Qin Yu was lying on a bed covered with several layers of brocade quilts. A certain part of his body was wrapped with white cloth, and his face was extremely pale. He had just recovered from a serious illness and he was beaten 80 times. Although he did not lose his life, this time he might need to recuperate for a few days. I didn't expect. He shook his head and said in a weak voice, I didn't expect His Majesty to indulge him to such an extent that he could even take 2 little princesses out of the palace. It's not an injustice to lose this time. King Shu on the side had a deep understanding of this. Last time, he lay in the palace for 2 months, while the other side was as free and unrestrained as ever outside the palace. Sometimes he even wondered who was the biological son of his father, himself or Li Yi. He had been like this since he was a child. Not to mention Mingzu, he even treated that damn Li Xian much better than he did. He felt that he had a fake father. These days, for the first time, he realized that the high position did not seem to be so easy to get. This kind of thought had never appeared before. King Shu shook his head and said, These days you'd better rest at home. This time there are many of you. If you were alone, it would not be as simple as dozens of floggings. That matter, is that it? Qin Yu suddenly said without rhyme or reason. King Shu knew what he was referring to. He shook his head helplessly again and said, What else can I do? Intermittent hysteria, madness, I can only admit that I'm unlucky. Yes. Qin Yu sighed and said, I can only admit that I'm unlucky. They had been together since childhood, so they naturally knew each other's temperament. They looked at each other and had a tacit understanding. The position of crown prince? Li Yi said in surprise, Of course, this matter has to be decided by His Majesty. It's better for us foreign officials to stay out of it. It wasn't easy to bring the topic to the main point. Qin Xiang thought that his meaning had been expressed very clearly. However, Li Xianbua had been avoiding the topic and never responded to it directly. He didn't know how many times he had the impulse to serve tea and send off his guest. After saying so much, Qin Xiang's throat was a little dry. He picked up the teacup and took a sip. Li Yi stood up from his seat, cupped his hands and said, If that's the case, this junior will take his leave. What? Is there something urgent in Uncle Li's family? Prime Minister Qin was stunned. He didn't know why Li Mu would do this. Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, Hasn't Prime Minister Qin already served tea to see the guests off? The current him was no longer the newbie who had just arrived here. The ancient people liked to beat around the bush when they spoke and did things. Serving tea meant sending the guest off. He was not as blind as Li Xian. This old man is just thirsty. Prime Minister Qin didn't realize that his actions would cause a misunderstanding. He said, I won't beat around the bush. I know that you have a grudge against the King of Shu. I only have one question. If your Highness is willing to let go of the grudge, can County Uncle Li let bygones be bygones? The King of Shu will inherit the throne in the future. You should be clear about the pros and cons. He would never be so straightforward when he talked to people. However, if he continued to talk in the way just now, he was afraid that there would be no result even when it was dark. However, he didn't have the patience to wait any longer. In fact, just now Li Yi had roughly guessed why Prime Minister Qin called him here today. However, was he sure that the King of Shu was willing to let go of the grudge? If that guy had such a mind, things wouldn't have gotten to this point. If he really became the emperor, would there be a way for him and others to live? Since he took action in the palace that day, there had been no way out. Naturally, it was impossible for him to turn back. Either he lived or the King of Shu died. There was no second possibility. Li Yi sighed and pointed to his head. He said, Prime Minister Qin, you know that sometimes I can't control myself, especially when I see the King of Shu. I don't know when my hysteria will act up. If I hurt the King of Shu again, I'm afraid that His Majesty will see my head. The court officials won't agree either. It's not good for anyone. In fact, until now, Prime Minister Qin still didn't know whether the intermittent hysteria was real or not. After all, if there was no illness, a normal person wouldn't do something like beating a prince in the palace under the watchful eyes of the public. However, in this world was there really such a magical illness? Or was the king of Shu and him born to oppose each other? The judgment of the Imperial Physician Bureau could not be false. After all, Li Yi had just arrived in the capital. It was impossible for him to control the Imperial Physician Bureau so quickly and make an imperial physician say something that deceived the emperor. If this was true, then he was too powerful. Prime Minister Qin frowned and asked, "This hysteria, how did you get it?" Li Yi sighed faintly. He said, "It's a long story. Everything starts from that winter 10 years ago. The king of Shu walked out of Qin Yu's courtyard, looked back and then turned to leave. The reason why Qin Yu fell into this situation was caused by Li Yi. Even his current predicament couldn't escape from him. However, now that he was getting stronger, he was valued by the emperor father, the eldest princess, Li Xian, and the family of generals. As long as he didn't ascend the throne, he couldn't do anything to him. Although he didn't want to admit it, it was a fact. He could influence some things in the court, but for him, who wasn't in the court at all, it was not worth mentioning. As for small fights in private, it wouldn't hurt the foundation, and there was a high possibility that it would be exposed. Naturally, he wouldn't do it easily. Coincidentally, he found out that the girl had a close relationship with him. If something happened to her, Li Yi would naturally not be happy, but he would be happy. However, he was depressed to find out that he could not even complete such a small task, which made him feel even more depressed. As he was thinking about these things, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest when he turned a corner in a long corridor. He looked down and saw the maid who accidentally bumped into him. He slapped her and said coldly, "Lowly maid, don't you have eyes?" If this was in the king of Shu's mansion, such a servant would have been dragged out and beaten. However, this was the Qin's mansion, so he naturally had to restrain himself. The maid was wearing a thin veil on her face. After the slap, the veil fell off, revealing a scar on her face. Seeing this, the king of Shu felt even more disgusted. Sorry. The maid covered her face and kept apologizing. In a pavilion not far away, the Qin family's fifth master shook his head in disappointment. What a coincidence. There's no fun to watch now. Just as he finished speaking, he saw a young figure walk out of the hall. After a moment of shock, a look of excitement appeared on his face. He grabbed a handful of melon seeds peeled by a maid and put them in his mouth, staring in a certain direction. Get lost. The king of Shu scolded the maid coldly and walked past her. Suddenly, he felt something and turned his head to look, meeting with another pair of eyes. This was a big surprise. Looking at that gaze, the king of Shu immediately thought of some unhappy things. He couldn't help but take a few steps back, but he didn't notice the steps behind him. He stepped on air, and the sharp pain from his ankle made his expression a little hideous. At the same time, he lost his balance and fell into the lotus pond at the side. Save me. In just a few breaths of time, the Qin manor was filled with the sounds of chickens flying and dogs jumping. Countless panicked figures began to madly rush towards the pool. Li Yi and Lu Mei looked at each other with innocent expressions on their faces. This time they really couldn't blame him. He was also very surprised to meet the king of Shu here. He just glanced at him and then the king of Shu jumped into the pond. Could this be the legendary king's aura? Not far away, the Qin family's fifth master widened his eyes, and melon seeds sprayed out from his nose. He didn't expect the king of Shu to be so afraid of County Uncle Li that he jumped into the pond in fear from a distance of several feet. It was said that the king of Shu was a good-for-nothing. Today he saw that the rumors were true. Chapter 549. The water in the lotus pond was not deep, and the king of Shu was quickly fished out by the servants of Qin's mansion. When he fell down, he was not injured, but his whole body was wet. But before he fell, he sprained his ankle. It seemed to be quite serious and he could not even stand up. He was immediately carried away by two servants, and another person hurried out of the mansion to find a doctor. After the king of Shu disappeared, the expressions of some servants in Qin's mansion became a little strange. Many people had seen the scene just now. A dignified prince was actually scared to this extent by a county uncle. It was really a bit too embarrassing. Qin Xiang walked out of the hall. When he looked back from the lotus pond, the way he looked at Li Yi was completely different from before. In the end, he did not succeed in roping him in. No matter what reason the other party found, he was still standing on the opposite side of the king of Shu. Moreover, the scene he saw just now proved that there was probably no way to turn back the situation. Li Yi turned back, cupped his hands to Qin Xiang and said, "I will leave first, the soup is still boiling at home." Qin Xiang nodded slightly and said to the servant girl beside him, Show the way for County Uncle Li. No need, remember the way. Li waved his hand, turned around and left. Looking at his back, Qin Xiang could not hide the pity on his face. The servant girl with a scar on her face also looked up, bit her lips and slowly left. Su San left Hongdong County and came to the street. I have not spoken, but my heart is miserable. Gentlemen, listen to me. Who will go to Nanjing and pass the letter to my San Lang? Fifth Lord, where are you going? Seeing the fifth lord humming a tune with his hands behind his back, Wu Er asked in confusion. The fifth lord sighed and said, It's not enough, not enough, let's go out to watch the opera. I heard from Rui that you went to Prime Minister Qin's mansion today? While eating, Rui looked up at Li Yi and asked. Oh yes. Li Yi picked up a mouthful of food and said casually, We just chatted casually and didn't even drink tea. The Qin family is so stingy. What business does Prime Minister Qin have with you? Although Li Yi rarely mentioned anything about the imperial court or outside matters, she was actually very clear about her family's position in the imperial court, friends and foes, as well as some changes in the situation. Because some of the departments in the brothel were in charge of such things. It's nothing much. We just casually chatted for a bit. He said that I'm going to assist the king of Shu, but he's just a pile of mud that can't be supported. What's there to support? Li Yi put down his chopsticks and peeled a prawn for Xiao Huan. Rui had no problem peeling prawns as they could do it with just 2 chopsticks. Only Xiao Huan could not learn it no matter how hard she tried and always made a mess. Xiao Huan and he both liked to eat prawns, but the prawns had been kept in the icehouse for a long time and were not very fresh. Today's prawns were sent by the Tsundra Lolita from the palace. He heard that they were the newly arrived tribute prawns. This was the advantage of being an emperor. He could eat whatever he wanted. If there was nothing in Jingdo, he could have other places pay tribute to him. Ever since the cost of making ice had been greatly reduced, fruits shipped from distant places had become cheap. Thank you, Prime Minister. Xiao Huan said sweetly and focused on eating. Prime Minister Qin and the King of Shu were all bad people. Prime Minister Qin would beat up bad people. She only wanted to eat prawns. Then did anything happen? Rui asked again. No. Li shook his head and said, They are all scholars. What can happen? Even if they really want to do something, they can't be so brazen. Besides, Fong and the others are following them, so there's no need to worry. After saying that, he looked at Rui and asked, How's the hero competition going? It should be coming soon, right? Rui shook her head and said, I'm afraid it will be delayed for a few more days. Recently there have been more and more experts coming to Jingdo. The heaven list changes every day. Even if it is held now, I'm afraid many people will not agree. Originally, they did not consider the problem of the number of people. If any Tom, Dick, or Harry came to fight for the position of the chief of Wulin, how long would the competition last? However, if the qualification was limited to the experts on the heaven list, the hero list would be in an uproar. Those who wanted to keep a low profile would probably not be able to do it. Whether they could be the chief or not, they still had to fight for the qualification. This directly led to a great increase in the number of competitions that needed to be held every day. Of course, there were many experts and it was much more exciting than before. The daily profits also doubled. If they were allowed to compete for another 2 months, not only would they be able to recoup their losses, but they would also make a lot of money. 2 months could not be delayed. According to the current situation, all the preparation work should be finished in half a month at most. The only thing left was to send Mississippi Lu to the top. After talking with Rui and the others about the heroes meeting, Li suddenly thought of something and said, I saw Lu Mei at the Qin Manor today. Xiao Huan suddenly raised her head and asked, Son-in-law, which Lu Mei is it? The one who always quarreled with you in Willow Leaf Village. The maid was stunned for a moment, then she pouted and said, It's her? Ever since she was young she had always been bullied by Lu Mei. After what had happened, it was only natural that she did not have a good impression of her. Why is she in Qin Manor? Where are third uncle and third aunt? Rui asked curiously. Mississippi Lu also looked over. Third uncle and third aunt. Li paused. He thought about it and told them the truth. Xiao Huan was stunned and the chopsticks in her hand fell to the ground. The expressions on Rui and Rui's faces froze. After a long time Rui sighed and said, Third uncle is actually very honest. When they went overboard he stood up for us. Third aunt. She has always been very powerful but, Rui shook her head. Even though there was some hatred in the past, death was like a lamp going out. In the end there was still some relationship. She thought of some things when she was young and felt a little depressed. Mississippi Lou put down her chopsticks and walked out of the door. If it was somewhere else I could help. But it's Qin Manor. If I show something different it will hurt her. Xiao Huan was not in a good mood and so was Rui. Li Yi said, but it's not impossible to ask her to leave Qin Manor. But I think she might not agree. It was not suitable for him to ask for a maidservant from Qin Manor. Of course the other party would not give it to him. But whether it was the Princess Royal, Atsundra Lolita, or directly asking the old emperor for a decree, although the process was a little troublesome, it was doable. After a short contact, Li Yi could feel some of her thoughts. She actually had some self-esteem, or else she would have asked for it herself. He thought that he knew he could not face Rui and the others so he could not force himself to do something. After a while, Li Yi walked out of the room. He decided to put the matter of Lu Mei aside for the time being. Not long after, Rui also walked out of the room. She was a little annoyed. Two maidservants were cleaning the courtyard while talking about something with great interest. I went out to help buy things today and heard something interesting on the street. What? What? I heard that yesterday at Prime Minister Qin's manor, the King of Shu was so scared that he sprained his ankle and fell into the water. It's so funny. I heard that the person just looked at him and the King of Shu was scared. I didn't expect him to be so timid, even more timid than Xiao Qin. The whole capital is laughing. Oh, I can't take it anymore. I'm dying of laughter. Who else can scare the king? Did he bump into a ghost? I just heard a few words and then followed him. I don't know what happened next. Qin Manor, the King of Shu? Standing in the corridor, Rui was stunned. She looked in a certain direction and saw that Li Yi had just disappeared. Didn't you say that nothing happened? In the King of Shu's manor, the King of Shu was furious when he heard the servant's report. He flipped the table on the spot. Who is it? Who is it? Tell Qin Yu and I will find out. I will kill him. In a courtyard of the Qin Manor, a light and cheerful tune could be heard. Brother Lu's words are too biased. Chapter 550. Li Yi found that the maidservants in the residence were a little strange these days. They often stole glances at him when he wasn't paying attention. When he noticed that they were also looking at him, they would all look away. This was something that had never happened before. When he washed his face in the morning, he looked at his reflection in the water a few more times. Recently he hadn't obviously become more handsome. There was no reason for him to suddenly become so charming. What are you looking at? When he sat in the courtyard and flipped through the old book that second granduncle gave him, he saw two maidservants hiding in the corner looking at him. They were whispering and pointing at him. He finally couldn't help but walk over and ask. No, nothing. The two maidservants lowered their heads and wiped the pillars, not daring to look at him. Li Yi was a little puzzled and ignored them. Yesterday, second granduncle told him that he had neglected his martial arts practice. He threw him a booklet without a cover and the pages had already turned yellow, and told him to read it when he had nothing to do. Fong wasn't so lucky. He was whipped by the two guards. If he persisted for half an hour without being whipped, he would have to start all over again. Lord Ju doesn't look that scary. Yes, are the rumors false? Are they not talking about our Lord Ju? I've asked them twice. They are talking about Lord Ju, but it really doesn't look like it. The two maidservants were full of doubts. Their Lord Ju didn't look like the kind of person who would scare people into jumping into the lake with just a glance, not to mention that he was a prince. If it was the second miss, it was possible. But if it was the handsome and amiable Lord Ju, they really couldn't imagine the scene at that time. But in the past 2 days the news had spread throughout the capital. Lord Ju had taken a look at the King of Shu and Prime Minister Qin's residence, and the King of Shu had jumped into the lake. It was said that he had even sprained his ankle. To the maids of the Li residence, this was truly unimaginable. Lord Ju had always been kind to them. They had heard that the King of Shu had been beaten up by him before, and it seemed that he had beaten him up quite badly. Naturally, this was something that they could not imagine. But to just take a look at him, how could that be? Li Yi glanced at the two maidservants in the corner and said, "You've already been cleaning that pillar for an hour. If you continue to slack off, I'll deduct your pay." The two maids immediately ran away. Lord Ju's deduction of money was just a passing remark, but they didn't dare to discuss it anymore. The erotic book in his hand gave him a headache. Based on his level, he might not be able to handle it. When he saw Rui walking in from outside, Li Yi hurriedly waved at her. "Wife, come here for a moment." In the next few days, Li Yi spent part of his time studying the erotic book. Rui seemed to value it very much. Whenever she had the time, she would give him pointers. Most of the time he would take Xiao Huan out for a stroll, to the brothel to watch shows and to patrol the shops. There was nothing much to do in the palace, and the days were as leisurely as ever. Sometimes he would also meet Wan Ruoqing. She was always very busy. In the beginning, Li Yi also felt that this was not the way to go on. There were too few people with the ability to manage. When there were more and more shops, there would be more and more things to do. It was far from enough to rely on just one or a few people. Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, "I'm already consciously cultivating them. But this is not a matter of a day or two. I can still take care of things here for the time being." She was always so restless. Li Yi said a few times, but it was obviously not effective. Fortunately, Xiao Zhu was by her side, so she would not be as tired as before. Li Yi changed the topic. He pointed to a shed at the entrance of the brothel and asked, "What is this used for?" When he came here just now, he noticed that there was this thing. There were a few beggars waiting outside and there was actually a queue. This is the porridge shed that was set up here 2 days ago. These beggars have nothing to do on weekdays, so they let them clean the inside after closing the brothel at night. Usually, it takes a lot of effort to clean, but there are quite a lot of them, so they can save a lot of time. Wan Ruoqing explained, "It doesn't cost much to give porridge twice a day, and they are also willing to do it. It's almost mealtime. Those who have worked here can get a bowl of porridge and 2 steamed buns with their tickets." The brothel was a crowded place and a lot of garbage was produced every day. It was really troublesome to clean, especially after all kinds of melon seeds became popular in the capital these days. The cleaning work became more and more troublesome. This was a good idea. Li Yi felt that this method was unlikely to be Wan Ruoqing's idea. Make the best use of people and not waste any. This was old Sun's style of doing things. If it was free porridge, he was afraid that it would become a habit. This was also good. In fact, the cost would actually be reduced. Not long after, someone carried a big pot of porridge out from inside. Li Yi took a look and it was not too thin. The beggars in the queue all had tickets in their hands. One ticket was a bowl of porridge, a salted vegetable and 2 steamed buns. For these beggars who didn't know the next meal, the food was already very good. Not far away there were beggars looking at them enviously. Seeing that there was still a lot left after the beggars received their food, the girl in charge of giving out porridge waved her hand and said, "There is still a little left today. If you want to eat, come over. This time it's free for you. If you want to eat every day, go to the other brothels in the capital and ask again. See the one with the willow leaf sign at the door? Ask them if they are still short of people." When the beggars heard this, they immediately swarmed over, loudly saying, "Great benefactor, living bodhisattva," and so on. The girl hurriedly said, "Line up, line up, line up, otherwise we won't give it." In the distant corner of the street, a beggar was about to walk over, but he was stopped by a person. The beggar turned his head and said with some impatience, "I don't care if the Empress of Heaven you speak of is real or not. She can't give me porridge to eat. I'm telling you, don't stop me anymore. In a bit there will be no porridge left. What is a bowl of porridge?" The young man next to the beggar looked at him with bright eyes and said, "2 months ago, I was the same as you. I didn't believe in the Empress of Heaven, but if it weren't for the Empress, I would have starved to death. How could I have lived until now?" The beggar looked at him again. Although his clothes were not luxurious, they were 100 times better than the beggars here. He suspiciously asked, "The Empress of Heaven, is it real? If you believe in her, you will really have porridge to eat?" "Humph, the Empress of Heaven has already appeared twice. Everyone in the capital knows of her. You can go ask." He took out a scroll from his chest and carefully opened it. His face was filled with respect and fanaticism as he said, "This is the Empress of Heaven. Wait a moment." The beggar looked at the scroll and hesitantly said, "Wait a moment, I'll go get a bowl of porridge, there really won't be any left. There are many beggars in the capital city. In the past 2 days many people have come to ask. I've told them to go to other brothels. We really do lack people." As Wan Ruoqing and Li Yi were talking about these things, they saw a beggar walk over from a distance. She picked up the spoon and waited for the beggar to place the bowl on the table in front of her. The young girl who had just given out porridge had a stomachache and went to the bathroom. She happened to see this, so she took her place. The beggar placed the bowl and ticket on the table. He looked up and wanted to give him a bit more, but his mouth opened halfway and his eyes nearly popped out. "Heaven, heaven, heaven. Empress." His voice trembled and his mind went blank. In that instant, a thought appeared in his mind, so those who believe in the Empress of Heaven can really have porridge to drink. "What? Empress, did you mistake me for someone else?" Wan Ruoqing shook her head with some doubt. Seeing that the young girl had already come over, She handed over the spoon in her hand and turned around to enter the brothel with Li Yi. The young girl rubbed her stomach and gave the beggar some porridge. She routinely said, "Tonight is the same time as before. Wait here and someone will bring you in." Hey, what's wrong?" The beggar regained his composure and looked at the young girl. He rubbed his eyes and looked back at her with a puzzled expression. But he quickly reacted. He picked up the bowl of porridge and forgot to even take the steamed bun. He turned around and ran across the street. In a corner of the street, the youth carefully put away the scroll in his sleeve. At this moment, the beggar ran over and grabbed his arm. With a trembling voice he said, I believe in the Empress of Heaven." As the youth was wondering why the beggar would have such a change, the beggar excitedly said, "I just saw the Empress of Heaven." The youth's body shook and a fanatical look appeared on his face. He grabbed the beggar's arm and asked, Where is the Empress of Heaven?" Chapter 551. Slow down. Everyone has one. The young girl waved her spoon. From time to time, beggars would gather around her. She was alone, so she seemed a bit flustered. No, next time I have to get them to help me." Thinking this, she continued to wave her hand. "After you finish eating, remember to go to the other brothels. Next time you have to use a ticket to get food." On the street, a beggar scratched his head in confusion. He said to himself, "That's not right. I just saw it. Did I see it wrong? It can't be wrong. The young man beside him shook his head. His eyes were full of light. "It must be the Empress. Only the Empress would have such a kind heart. Then can I join the holy religion?" The beggar looked at him and nervously asked. "Come with me," the young man said in a low voice. He glanced at the brothel again and committed it to memory. The last time he saw the goddess appear with his own eyes, it was also near here. The two of them turned around and their figures quickly disappeared into the vast crowd. Not long after, in a remote courtyard in the capital, the purple-clothed man raised an eyebrow. He asked, "The Empress appeared again. Did you see it with your own eyes?" The young man shook his head. "Although I didn't see it with my own eyes, the words of the new believer shouldn't be false. The last time I saw the Empress it was near here." The purple-clothed man's eyes flashed. After a while he said, "All right, I understand. Although the Empress is an immortal, she cares for the believers. She will reincarnate into the human world and spread her grace. What you saw was the reincarnation of the Empress after she abandoned her divine power. Remember not to disturb her." "I understand." The young man respectfully cupped his hands and left. His expression was sincere. Whether it was the Empress or the reincarnation of the Empress, they were both existences that gave him a second life. To him there was no difference. After the young man left, the purple-clothed man walked to a door and gently knocked. "Come in." A light voice came from inside the room. The purple-clothed man pushed open the door and entered. Before he could speak, the middle-aged Taoist nun sitting cross-legged on the bed said, "You did very well. Since the believers of the capital believe in that Empress, then she must be the Empress. But how should we explain it to the believers in other places?" The man in purple asked tentatively. The middle-aged Taoist nun lightly said, "Since the heavenly Empress can have one incarnation, then why can't she have two? One to bring good fortune to all living beings and the other to punish. Why not?" The purple-robed man was stunned for a moment, then immediately said respectfully, "The Empress is wise. The woman in the portrait should be real. Spread the word that the Empress has abandoned her divine power, sealed her memories, and incarnated into the mortal world to experience the suffering of the mortal world. Only then can she benefit more believers. Tell them not to disturb her." After a pause, the middle-aged Taoist nun spoke again. "Also, you should personally investigate who that woman is. This subordinate will do as you bid." The purple-clothed man immediately nodded. Although the events of that day were outside of their plans, after the Empress' reasonable arrangements, they actually had endless benefits. However, they still needed to be careful when dealing with that woman. If there was the slightest mistake, then all of their efforts in the capital would be for nothing. "There is one more thing." The purple-clothed man thought for a moment, then said, "The government seems to have discovered something. Recently, the intensity of the investigation on these matters has increased. This subordinate is worried that if this continues, I'm afraid that there will be some oversight. Then have them stop all actions and return to their normal lives." The middle-aged Taoist nun nodded and asked, "How is the Assembly of Heroes going?" The purple-clothed man said, This time's assembly of heroes has stirred up the entire martial world. The competition on the heaven proclamation is fierce and it has been delayed by a month. At the latest it will be held in half a month. Those secluded sects have also sent their true experts. However, the number one on the heaven proclamation is still that woman called Lu Rui. When speaking of those secluded sects, the middle-aged Taoist nun's expression did not change. However, when the purple-clothed man mentioned that name, her brows involuntarily twitched. Lu Rui, the young woman she had met in Qing'an Prefecture, was a grandmaster expert like her. She was also the biggest obstacle to her taking the position of alliance leader. It went without saying how useful the position of the leader of the Wulin alliance was to the Holy Church. Otherwise, she wouldn't have started making arrangements so early. Especially after seeing the power of the imperial palace, she clearly realized that the Holy Church's current power was far from enough. The position of alliance leader could not be lost. Lu Rui. She closed her eyes and softly said this name. In the past 2 days, the headlines of the entertainment section of the Capital Daily were undoubtedly about a young royal family who lost his footing and got drenched by a murderous stare. A prince was as timid as a mouse. Was he the king of Shu or the Rat King? As for County Uncle Li, he was naturally covered with some legendary colors. There was a rumor in the capital that County Uncle Li got sick because of the fear of the king of Shu. Later, in the imperial palace, he seriously injured the king of Shu in front of all the officials, which undoubtedly gave the rumor-mongers a hard slap in the face. As time went by, this matter was almost forgotten by the people in the capital. However, the incident of the king of Shu jumping into the lake made people dig up the past. In contrast, it was full of irony. Of course, the influence of this incident was far more than that. As the first successor to the throne, the title of king of Shu could be said to be a topic of conversation. His every move was watched by the officials and the people. However, this successor always did some extremely shameful things, which made the people in the capital start to doubt whether their fate would be handed over to such a thing in the near future. Naturally, the officials also had the same concerns. Many people were not very satisfied with the king of Shu. After this incident, they naturally opposed the king of Shu even more. As for those who were still waiting to see which side to take, the balance in their hearts gradually began to tilt. As for those who were originally partial to the king of Shu but were not die-hard fans of the king of Shu, they even began to doubt their lives. Was this a damn fake prince? Could the king of Shu really make it? There were also movements from the other princes. If the king of Shu really couldn't make it, they would have to replace him in advance. No wonder His Majesty didn't express his opinion when Prime Minister Qin and others strongly recommended the king of Shu as the crown prince. When it came to judging people, who could be more brilliant than His Majesty? Of course, these things were not in the hands of Li Yi for the time being. He was in the imperial palace, giving special treatment to Monarch Jin. Sir, I still don't think I can make it. Monarch Jin's chubby face was much thinner than before. He looked at Li Yi with a troubled expression. What? You don't want to be the dean of the College of Mathematics? Li Yi looked at him and asked. Not anymore. Li Han shook his head and said. Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, Do you know where Jinzhou is? Yes, my fief is in Jinzhou. Li Han nodded. Li Yi asked again, Then do you know what Jinzhou is like? Li Han was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. Jinzhou is very far from the capital. If you take a carriage, you won't be able to get there in 10 days or half a month. There are no sugar-coated haws, no beggar's chicken, no ice in summer and no fresh vegetables in winter. You won't be able to see your father and mother even once a year. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Now tell me, in a few years, do you want to go to Jinzhou, that remote place where birds don't even shit, to be a prince, or do you want to be the dean of the College of Mathematics and live freely in the capital? Li Han was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly swallowed his saliva. He looked at Li Yi and said with a firm gaze, Sir, give me the book. When he walked out of the museum, Li Yi couldn't help but sigh. These children nowadays were really getting harder and harder to deceive. It was hard to persuade them. It would be better if they were simpler and simpler. Whatever the teacher said, he wouldn't have to waste so much time talking to them. He went to see Yongning and played chess with Tsundra Lolita for a while. Finally, he used the super invincible celestial dog that could swallow the whole universe. Only then did he leave with satisfaction. He didn't go to Princess Royal Highness to ask her how she was doing as the chairman of the Women's Federation, how many die-hard female fans she had, how many officials and dignitaries she had won over. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but when he was talking with the old emperor about the College of Mathematics, Li Yi found that the emperor looked at him a little strange, as if he always had an impulse to kick someone in the next second. The imperial palace wasn't a place to stay for long, so it was better to leave as soon as possible. But thinking about it, it was normal. His son had become the laughingstock of the capital, and the title of King of Rats was even more resounding than King of Shu. This time he was afraid that he would lose a lot of fans in the court. Prime Minister Qin and others had worked hard for so long, but because of this guy's jump, not to mention going back to square one night, it was bound to go back 2 years. Thinking about it, Prime Minister Qin and others should doubt their lives a little more in the past few days. Alas, the old man was so old. If he often worried so much, it would damage his lifespan. He was really worried about the old man. No wonder the old emperor wanted to kick him. If it was him, he would also kick him. Kicking people was a light punishment, and the culprit should be hung up and beaten. The person who spread rumors everywhere was simply a psycho. Was he so terrible that he could kill people with his eyes? If he really had this skill, could King of Shu live to this day? Forget it, it was better to come to the palace less these days. Even if he came, he would not see the old emperor who was in his 40s. Maybe he had reached his menopause, so he could not afford to provoke him. Today he helped Prince Jean to strengthen his faith. He believed that in the beggar's chicken, under the attraction of knowledge, he would work harder to study mathematics and strive to be a good successor to the dean of the College of Mathematics. What did he do just now? Emperor Jing asked casually while reading the memorials. Changde walked in from outside the hall and said, "Your Majesty, County Uncle Li taught Prince Jean about mathematics for a while in the Bowen Hall, and played with the 2 little princesses for an hour. He just left the palace." Emperor Jing put down the memorial and rubbed his eyebrows. When it came to the 2 little princesses, he had a headache. Changde smiled and said, "Your Majesty, don't blame me for being talkative. Princess Shanning's words carry no harm. County Uncle Li always knows how to behave himself in these things." Behave himself? Emperor Jing picked up another memorial and said, "He killed County Uncle Li with his eyes, and made King of Shu jump into the lake with his eyes. He has lost the face of the royal family. What does he know about propriety?" Changde smiled and said no more. Although His Majesty said so, in fact, in recent days he had been doing things in the style of that boy. King of Shu could not represent the face of the royal family, and, seeing that His Majesty no longer said anything, he slowly retreated out of the hall. There were no clouds in the autumn sky, and the wrinkles on his face stretched out. After all, the world still belongs to these young people. "Chen, what can I do for you?" Xiao Chui opened the courtyard door a crack and poked her head out. She looked at the young man standing outside and asked, "Is your mistress at home?" The young man waved his folding fan and asked with a smile. Xiao Chui frowned when she smelled the strong smell of alcohol. She grew up in a brothel and hated the smell of alcohol the most. Hearing that, she said, "Chen, if you have anything to say, just tell me. I will tell my mistress." "What? A guest is here and you won't let him in?" The smile on Chen's face disappeared, and several servants behind him also stepped forward. Although Xiao Chui was afraid, she still said boldly, "Men and women should not touch each other. There are only me and my mistress in the courtyard. In order to avoid gossip, Chen should say it here." "You bitch." An angry expression appeared on Chen's face. Just as he said this, the courtyard door opened and Zheng Zimo walked out. She said lightly, "Chen, what do you want? Say it." The young man in front of her, who reeked of alcohol, was Chen, who had been pestering her a lot these days. At first he pretended to be polite and well-mannered, but after running into a wall a few times, he gradually returned to his playboy nature. She had seen many people like this before. Seeing Zheng Zimo come out, Chen immediately smiled and said, "Zimo, you're out. Let's talk inside, let's talk inside. Let's talk here." Zheng Zimo pulled Xiao Chui back half a step. Her voice seemed to be 1,000 miles away. A trace of anger flashed across Chen's face, but the next moment he smiled again and said, "Zimo, you know my feelings for you. I promise as long as you agree to me, you will enjoy endless wealth in the future. If that's the case, then there's no need to talk about it anymore." Zheng Zimo waved her hand. She had heard this kind of talk so much that her ears were about to get calluses. She looked at him and said, "Chen's status is noble. I really don't deserve him. It's better for Chen not to mention this matter in the future. After all, Chen had drunk today." After hearing this, no matter how self-restrained he was, he couldn't help it. She was just a prostitute, yet she made him spend so much effort. He angrily said, "It's your fortune that I like you. Who do you think you are? So what if you're the goddess of Luo Shui? Do you really think you're the daughter of a noble family? Let me tell you, I'm going to have you today." After saying that, he reached out to grab Zheng Zimo's arm. Xiao Chui's expression changed. She pushed Qin away and hurriedly said, "Miss, quickly go inside." Behind Qin, 2 attendants quickly stepped forward and blocked the courtyard door. Tseng Zumo and Xiao Chui's expressions both changed. Tseng Zumo's expression turned cold and said, "Trespassing? We can report this to the authorities." Qin had already stabilized his figure at this time and laughed. "Trespassing is nothing. Today I'm going to rob a woman." Then he reached out again and touched Tseng Zumo's face. Chapter 552. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. The young Qin's wrist was grabbed by someone. He raised his arm and twisted his body into a strange shape. He was in so much pain that his facial features were twisted together. "Let go of my young master." Several servants shouted and quickly ran over, wanting to stop the strange woman who suddenly appeared. "Get lost." However, after the shout, they only felt their vision blur. A huge force came from their chest and abdomen. Their bodies flew backward and fell heavily to the ground. "What did you just say?" Yang Liuqing used more strength in her hand and looked at the young man coldly. "No, nothing." The sudden increase in pain made Qin sober. He quickly said, "It hurts, it hurts. Let go of me." "Get lost. Don't let me see you again," Yang Liuqing said coldly. Qin's body also flew out. This fall was even worse. His bones were about to fall apart. He got up from the ground and took 2 steps back. He pointed at them fiercely and said, "Just you wait." This time he didn't dare to continue saying harsh words. He turned around and left with a few servants. After all, this woman didn't look easy to deal with. It seemed that there were accomplices coming from the side. If they stayed, they would probably suffer even more. Although what happened just now was short, many people saw it. They surrounded and pointed at young Master Chen's back as he left. Their eyes were filled with disdain. A foppish young master flirting with a good girl. This was a scene that happened every day in the capital. "Miss Yang, why are you here?" Zheng Zumo looked at Yang Liuqing with some confusion. The two of them knew each other in Qing'an Prefecture, but their friendship wasn't deep. At this moment she was a little curious. Why would she appear here at such a critical moment? Moreover, it seemed like she had been here all along. Yang Liuqing waved at the figures that were approaching them. She then looked back at them and asked, "Are you guys okay?" Zheng Zumo shook her head. Looking at the figures retreating, she seemed to have understood something. She didn't ask any more. She looked at her and said, "Miss Yang, please come in and have a seat." Yang Liuqing shook her head and said, "I won't go in. It hasn't been peaceful these days. If you encounter anything wrong, just shout from inside. Someone outside can hear you." After saying that, she smiled and turned to leave. In the past few months, she had been working hard to improve her ranking on the heaven list. However, after entering the top 30, it was extremely difficult for her to win. She needed to accumulate enough strength. She had fought countless people and her experience was already very different from before. There was no point in participating in more battles. It just so happened that she had a mission, so she simply came here. She didn't expect to encounter such a thing on the first day. It was just that she was curious about Miss Zhang. It had already been so long, so she should have been welcomed into the house by senior uncle long ago. Why was she still? Thinking of this, she stopped thinking about it. This matter seemed a little complicated, and it wasn't something she could participate in. "Miss they?" Xiao Chui watched them leave and scratched her head in confusion. Zheng Zumo waved her hand and said, "It's fine. Let's go in." At this moment she could also guess that Li Yi must have sent more people here. However, she did not expect that young Duke Qin's revenge would not come, but this young Master Qin. However, in this way she was indeed a lot more relieved. As for that Qin, she might have been a little worried before. However, she had seen the king, the duke, and all the top foppish young masters in the capital. The son of the Minister of Rights didn't seem to be that scary. "Bitch, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." On a street somewhere in the capital, the young man with the surname Qin rubbed his chest. His expression was still a little painful as he said coldly, "Young master, are you okay?" A servant saw this and hurried forward to help him pat the dust off his body. "I'm fine." The young man stood where he was and waited for the servant to pat the dust off his clothes. Then he said gloomily, "She's just a prostitute. Why is she pretending to be a good person? Since that's the case, don't blame me for being impolite." "Then young master, where are we going now?" "To the spring pavilion." The young man with the surname Qin said angrily. After so many days, he still hadn't taken down the Luo Shui goddess. He was afraid that people would laugh at him. At this moment he had a stomach full of anger and needed to vent. As for other things, he needed to think about them at length. Early in the morning, the capital's governor, Lu Dayo, came out of his wife's room and rubbed his waist. He couldn't help but sigh. Time really didn't wait for people. Without the tiger and wolf medicine, his body was becoming more and more unable to take it. These days, his wife complained that she always went to his concubine's room and neglected him. She wanted to perform well last night, but she didn't expect that she would overdo it. Her body couldn't take it anymore. He looked up and saw a figure walking out of the courtyard. He hurriedly asked, "Where are you going so early in the morning?" "To the Union." The girl turned her head and said. The next moment, she disappeared without a trace. The Union, what's there to cooperate with?" County Magistrate Lu complained. For the Union she went out every 2 or 3 days. Was this what a woman should do? However, this involved Her Royal Highness, and there were maids and servants around his daughter. Nothing serious would happen, so he let her go. These days, nothing major happened in the capital, and he didn't have too many official affairs to deal with. County Magistrate Lu sat in the back hall, drinking tea and holding a popular novel on the market, enjoying a moment of leisure. "Your Excellency, something serious happened." Before he finished drinking a cup of tea, a person hurried in and said anxiously, "What's the hurry? What can happen?" County Magistrate Lu looked at him discontentedly. "Can there be a murder case?" Detective Zhao swallowed and said, "Your Excellency, there really is a murder case." County Magistrate Lu spat out all the tea in his mouth. Before he finished drinking a cup of tea, he had to hurry out. County Magistrate Lu looked unlucky. It had been a long time since there had been a murder case in the capital. His Majesty had praised him last time for his outstanding achievements in public security in the few months he was in office. It had only been a few days and there was a murder case. Wasn't it a slap in his face? Moreover, the identity of the victim this time was really sensitive. He was the son of the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Rights, and he was inextricably linked to Marquis Chen's mansion. He had to be careful. What happened? On the way, County Magistrate Lu asked Detective Zhao. Detective Zhao immediately answered, "The victim is the son of Lord Chen's family in the Ministry of Rights." It was said that the servants in the mansion didn't see him get up for a long time, so the maid went to knock on the door, but no one answered. Later, when they forced their way in, they found him dead on the bed. He died on his own bed? County Magistrate Lu frowned and asked, "What's the cause of death?" Detective Zhao replied, "There's no result from the coroner yet, but according to the servant who reported the case, it should be poisoning. It was already troublesome for a person to die, but it was the son of an official who died. It was twice as troublesome. He could have died of any reason, but it happened that he was poisoned, which made it even more difficult." County Magistrate Lu didn't have Louis, so he had a headache thinking about this case. He said with some irritation, "Find out who the son of the Chen family has been in contact with these days, and what he has done. Don't forget anything." Detective Zhao nodded and said, "I've asked someone to ask the servants who usually follow him." Before they reached the Chen's mansion, they bumped into several constables. "Why did you guys come out?" Arrestor Zhao was stunned for a moment before he asked. One of them waved his hand helplessly and said, "This case has just been taken over by the Ministry of Justice." Hearing that, County Magistrate Lu was stunned and said with some doubt, "The Ministry of Justice has taken over?" Chapter 553. The Ministry of Penalty was responsible for reviewing all kinds of laws and reviewing the criminal cases sent to the Ministry of Penalty. They rarely intervened in local cases, unless it was a big case or a case was handled by imperial decree. Otherwise, with how big the Jing state was, they would be exhausted to death just by talking about the cases near the capital. The death of the son of the vice-chancellor of the Ministry of Rights was certainly a big case, but it was just a big case with limited influence. The Ministry of Penalty had no right to intervene. What was more, the Ministry of Penalty had come before he arrived. County Magistrate Lu's eyes flickered. There must be some secret deal. However, if the Ministry of Justice wanted to intervene, then let them. It was a good thing that he could extricate himself from this and avoid this trouble. "Have you questioned him? How did Chen die?" He didn't want to get involved in the abnormal behavior of the Ministry of Penalty. He didn't even want to enter the Chen family. He asked the constable on his way back to the county government. The bailiff immediately replied, "The coroner has already examined the body and determined that it was death by poison. There was a spot on the arm that had turned blue, and there was a small hole in it. From it, a very fine silver needle was extracted. As for the specific type of poison, I don't remember. According to the coroner, this type of poison is extremely rare. Even a small amount can be fatal, but it won't kill the victim immediately. The poison takes 8 to 10 hours to take effect, and once the poison spreads throughout the body, the victim will feel sleepy and die silently in their sleep. Then it's easy to solve. County Magistrate Liu shook his head and said, "We just need to push back the time of his death to 8 to 10 hours to find out what he was doing and who was around him at that time. Then it'll be easy to catch the murderer." He was a little regretful at the moment. He should have acted faster and solved the case earlier, so that the Ministry of Penalty wouldn't have gotten ahead of him. Detective Zhao looked at County Magistrate Liu, scratched his head and said, "Lord Liu, this case doesn't seem to be that simple. The servants of the Qin family didn't find Chen's death until this morning. Who knows whether he died last night or at dawn?" County Magistrate Liu was stunned. He looked at him and said, "I've handled more cases than you. I don't need you to remind me. Can't we just arrest everyone he came into contact with yesterday?" Detective Zhao cursed in his heart, "Why didn't you die from eating so much salt?" However, an awkward smile appeared on his face as he said, "Sir is wise. Who did he come into contact with yesterday?" Lord Liu snorted coldly and asked. The bailiff replied, "Your Excellency, Qin didn't do anything yesterday. He went to the brothel early in the morning and met up with 2 of his friends. After that, he went to the brothel again. Then, he seemed to have gotten into a conflict with someone because he was drinking and flirting with a woman. He seemed to have suffered a small loss. Then he went to the brothel again, teasing a commoner girl and getting into a conflict with others?" County Magistrate Liu quickly grasped the key point and asked, "Who is he flirting with and where?" "Is that Willow Lane over there? That woman seems to be quite famous. She's the goddess of Luo River or something. She's very famous in the capital." County Magistrate Liu shook his head. It seemed that this case was not difficult. It was very likely that, as he was thinking about this, his expression suddenly froze. He raised his head abruptly and looked at the bailiff with a serious face. He asked, "Who did you say just now?" "Luo, goddess of Luo River. When we came out just now, the Ministry of Justice had already gone to arrest her." Seeing that Lord Liu's expression was a little strange, the bailiff stuttered. County Magistrate Liu's expression changed. He immediately ordered, "Prepare the horse quickly." Rui and Rui were not at home. Li Yi and Xiao Huan were too lazy to cook, so they moved the grill out. There was no sun today, so it was cool in the courtyard. They didn't ask for anyone's help. It was just the 2 of them. They busied themselves for an hour and skewered the meat and vegetables. Then, the little servant girl moved a small stool and sat beside him with her chin resting on her hand as she watched him grill the meat. Li Yi turned the skewered meat attentively. After a while, Xiao Huan tugged his arm and pointed in the direction of the door. Li Yi raised his head and looked over, then sighed. In the entire capital, there were only 2 people who dared to come to one's house without a gift and even wanted to freeload a meal. "It's already October. Your Kunlun purple melon is still so fresh?" Li Xian ate the grilled eggplant and asked with a surprised expression. October was nothing. His eggplant was so fresh all year round. The food for 2 was not enough for 4 people. Li Yi asked Xiao Huan to get some more. Li Xian and Princess Royal were here to talk about the business cooperation between the 3 families. In fact, there was nothing much to talk about. They were just paying and waiting for the dividends. In terms of funds, Li Yi was actually not that lacking. However, the 3 heroes of the capital advanced and retreated together. If there was money, they would earn it together. If he caused trouble, the 3 of them would shoulder it together. As friends, he would feel bad if he didn't bring them along when it came to making money. The 2 of them really didn't know much about doing business. It didn't take long for them to deviate from the topic. As the future presidents of the Science Academy and the Women's Academy, they actually didn't have any ideas. How the academy would operate, what to learn, and what to teach were all problems. Last time they only talked about it briefly with Princess Royal Highness. These things couldn't be explained in detail in a short time. This time they just talked about it in more detail. As for the more specific things, they needed to figure it out and decide on their own. "Lordly, bad news?" A slightly anxious voice suddenly sounded from the door. Li Yi looked back and saw County Magistrate Liu striding in. Fang followed behind with a puzzled expression. "Lord Liu, what's the matter? Speak slowly." Li Yi didn't know what had happened to make a capital magistrate like him so flustered. He walked over and looked at him. County Magistrate Liu calmed down a little and immediately said, "Lord Li, Miss Zheng was taken away by the Ministry of Justice." Li Yi glanced at County Magistrate Liu and strode out of the door. "Let's talk on the way." Fang had already rushed out to prepare the carriage after County Magistrate Lu said that. Li Xian threw away the eggplant he was eating, and Emingzu came from the side. Not long after, the 3 carriages set off from the gate of the mansion and went straight to the capital. In the small courtyard, Xiao Chui walked to Zheng Zimo with a worried expression and asked, "Miss, what should we do if that Qin guy comes again? Should we tell this to Li Li?" "No need." Zheng Zimo shook her head. Even if the other party was the son of the Minister of Rights, this was the capital. He couldn't be too presumptuous. If it weren't for the alcohol yesterday, he wouldn't have dared to do such a thing. As soon as she finished speaking, someone knocked on the door. "Let me see if it's Li Li." Xiao Chui ran to the door excitedly. She quickly opened the door and saw a few fierce-looking people dressed like officials standing there. Her pretty face suddenly paled and she asked with a trembling voice, Who are you looking for?" "Who is Zheng Zimo?" the leading official asked in a cold voice. "I am. May I ask why you are looking for me?" Zheng Zimo walked out and looked at these people with a slightly vigilant expression. The official glanced at her and said coldly, "The young master of the Ministry of Rights was killed last night. We suspect that you are related to the case. Come with us." "Qin is dead?" Xiao Chui's body trembled and her face immediately turned pale. Zheng Zimo stood still. After a moment of daze, she seemed to have thought of something and her expression changed. "Take him away," the leader of the bailiffs said coldly and turned around to leave. Yang Luqing walked over from a distance and waved to the people behind her. She glanced at Zheng Zimo and Xiao Chui, then at the officials and said, "In that case, take me with you." Chapter 554. Who are you? The bailiff from the Ministry of Justice turned around and asked Yang Luqing coldly. Yang Luqing looked at him and said faintly, "Yesterday when Mr. Qin came here, I was there too. I was the one who fought with him." The officer narrowed his eyes and said, "If that's the case, then take him away as well." The bailiffs behind her were holding shackles and chains in their hands. Just as they were about to step forward, Yang Luqing raised her hand to stop them. She looked at them and asked, "Do you have the arrest warrant from the Ministry of Justice?" One of the officers' face darkened and he said in a low voice, "How dare you? How dare you question the Ministry of Justice?" Yang Liuking's voice grew colder. "If you don't have it, then put away your tricks. Do you really think you can do whatever you want just because you're from the Ministry of Justice?" The leading officer's eyes flashed. He didn't expect this woman to know the Ministry of Justice's procedures so well. There were countless people watching the Ministry of Justice, so he couldn't go too far. Finally, he waved his hand and said, "It's just a summons. There's no need to shackle them. Take them away." Yang Liuking looked behind him and saw that 2 people were missing. He turned around and said to Zheng Zimo with a smile, "Don't worry, Miss Zheng. It'll be fine. Let's go." "That Qin is dead?" Zheng Zimo's expression was still a bit dazed. Although she didn't have a good impression of Qin, she still felt a bit complicated when she saw a living person die just like that. The main hall of the Ministry of Justice. The words "Mirror of Eminence" were hung high in the hall. More than 10 officers stood on 2 sides. As the chief judge, Assistant Minister Zhao sat in the main seat with a gloomy expression. The faces of the 2 attendants were filled with doubt. The Ministry of Justice was usually busy. Unless the emperor personally ordered it, they were usually only responsible for the review of major cases. It was extremely rare to hear a case in court like this. However, this case was different. The son of the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights was poisoned to death. Coincidentally, the Qin family had a close relationship with the public house of Qin. Early this morning, the public house had pressured the Ministry of Justice. Otherwise, this kind of case would have been handed over to the local government. Why would the Ministry of Justice personally take over? If one were to look deeper into the matter, the Ministry of Justice had actually stretched their hand a little too far this time. The Assistant Minister of Justice asked with a solemn face, "What's the result of the autopsy?" A white-haired old man stepped forward and said, "Sir, the deceased died of poisoning. There were bruises on his chest, but there were no fatal wounds on his body. A silver needle dipped in poison as thin as a hair was removed from his right arm. The time of death was between yesterday night and this morning. Based on this, the time of poisoning should be between yesterday afternoon and the 5th hour. My poor child, who did this to him? My lord, you must uphold justice for us." The tears on the face of a woman sitting at the side had yet to dry. At this time she could not help but cry bitterly. Assistant Minister Zhao glanced at her and said, "Madam Qin, this official can understand your feelings, but this is the main hall of the Ministry of Justice. Please be quiet and do not disturb this official's investigation. Come, help the madam out, a middle-aged man beside the woman said in a low voice. A middle-aged man next to the woman said in a low voice. Two maidservants immediately walked out and supported the woman as she left. I'll leave everything to Sir Zhao, he said after taking a deep breath and clasping his hands at Assistant Minister Zhao. The reason he was able to sit here and listen today was because of the face of the Duke's public house. Otherwise, the Ministry of Justice would not give him any face as he was just a small minister-counselor. Assistant Minister Zhao nodded and slapped the gavel. Looking at the people kneeling in front of the hall, he asked, "This official asks you from yesterday afternoon to the 7th hour, where did your young master go?" A few of the servants who had been following young Master Chen heard the sound of the gavel and couldn't help but tremble. One of the servants immediately replied, "Replying to my lord, the young master was at the Spring Fragrance Pavilion yesterday. When it was about midnight he went to the Willow Lane to find Miss Zhang. After that, he stayed at the Spring Fragrance Pavilion until evening." When these words were said, even the bailiffs at the side couldn't help but laugh. This Chen was really interesting, treating the brothel as if it was his own home. Assistant Minister Zhao furrowed his brows and said, "Bring all the relevant personnel here." A bailiff below replied, "Sir, Zheng Zumo of Willow Alley has not arrived yet, but the madam of the Spring Fragrance Pavilion and the girls who had contact with Chen have all been brought here." Thus, just as everyone was mulling over this phrase, they saw a gorgeously dressed middle-aged woman walk in from the outside with more than a dozen coquettish women. "These people?" Assistant Minister Zhao furrowed his brows and asked, "These people are all?" The bailiff said somewhat helplessly, "Sir, these girls are the ones who had contact with Chen yesterday, then the madam also had contact with him." The bailiff's expression was somewhat awkward. He couldn't help but glance at the madam, his stomach rolling. The face of the middle-aged man listening at the side twitched. Assistant Minister Zhao stilled, but before he could speak, the madam knelt down with a thud and sobbed, "Sir, you have wronged me." Even if this servant had all the courage in the world, this servant would not dare to harm Qin. Moreover, Qin is one of the top financial backers of our pavilion. This servant can't wait to welcome him. How could he? Assistant Minister Zhao said coldly. This official has not asked a question. How can you shout in court? If you say another word, drag her away and give her 20 strokes of the paddle. The madam's throat seemed to be strangled, and her voice came to a sudden stop. Assistant Minister Zhao looked at her and said, "From the moment young Master Chen first stepped into the Spring Fragrance Pavilion yesterday, tell this official in detail everything that happened." In detail? The madam stilled and asked uncertainly. "What, do you still have something you want to hide?" Assistant Minister Zhao looked coldly at her and asked in a cold voice. No. The brothel keeper's expression changed and she immediately said, Xiang, quick, young Master Chen is calling you first. You go first. Lian, Hua, Fei, the three of you are calling him second. Hurry up and prepare. The three? Among the 2 rows of bailiffs, someone smacked his lips, an envious expression on his face. In the Ministry of Justice, the door of a certain guard room slowly opened, and a fatigued Louis Zhang walked out. After reading through the files for another night, he still hadn't found any useful clues. At this time his head was slightly dizzy. The minister had claimed illness and was resting at home. He would probably have to wait until he returned before he could read those files that had already been sealed. In the next few days he would temporarily focus his attention on the Supreme Court. Official Lu, seeing him walk out, a person at the door immediately bowed. "Let's go." Louis Zhang waved his hand and walked out. That person waved at someone nearby and said, "You guys leave." At the door of the Ministry of Justice's main hall, a few people turned their heads. When they saw the 2 people walking out, their expressions were somewhat regretful. They reached out to adjust the position of something in unison and quickly followed. On the street, Louis Zhang walked with his head lowered. Behind him, a few people were discussing something in low voices. At a certain moment, he suddenly raised his head and saw a carriage driving over in front of him. A look of shock appeared on his face. "Sir?" In the main hall of the Ministry of Justice, the bailiffs were all flushed from hearing this. Occasionally, they would secretly stretch out their hands or bend their backs slightly. In the hall, the woman was still talking incessantly. "Qin is really amazing. He tormented me for almost an hour. Then he changed 4 positions and there was Guanyin." "Shut up." Assistant Minister Zhao finally couldn't help but scold her angrily. He stared at the woman and moved his hand that was on the wooden block under his body for a moment. He asked, Are you saying that young Master Chen once said that his right arm hurt? The woman nodded repeatedly and said, he said it, he said it. When Chen entered the room he said it, but we didn't pay attention to it at the time. Chen only took off his clothes to take a look. Then I also took off my clothes and then, for positions, shut up. Assistant Minister Zhao slammed the wooden block and said, all right, take them away first. Although this wave of questioning made him want to die, he had also obtained some useful information. Before the young Master Chen entered the brothel, he had already been poisoned, but the poison had not acted up. With the brothel women as witnesses, this information should not be false and could be used to convince the public. Moreover, the young Master Chen had no grudge against the brothel women. These people also had no motive to kill him. In this case, the murderer was someone else. Have you brought the other suspects? He asked again. Sir, they have arrived, a bailiff below replied. The eyes of the assistant minister flashed and he said, bring them up. Immediately, a few more figures walked out. Behind them were the bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice. In front of them were 3 women. One of them was tall and had a cold expression. She stood slightly at the front, and the 2 behind her all had pale faces. Miss. Xiao Chui had never seen such a scene. She looked at the bailiffs with sticks in their hands and the dignified official holding Zheng Zimo's hand. Her voice trembled slightly. Seeing the 3 people standing in the middle of the hall, Assistant Minister Zhao said coldly, why don't you kneel before me? Just as Xiao Chui and Zheng Zimo were about to kneel, Yang Liuqing reached out to support them. He looked up at Assistant Minister Zhao and said, why should we kneel? Chem? Assistant Minister Zhao's eyes were slightly cold. Your Jing Kingdom. Yang Liuqing looked at him and said. After realizing that something was wrong, he stopped and said, the crime has not been determined. The Jing Kingdom does not have a law that forbids kneeling before a trial. How dare you? Assistant Minister Zhao's expression changed and he slammed the gavel down. Yang Liuqing's expression did not change. He only patted Zheng Zimo and Xiao Chui's hands to comfort them. Sir, he was the one who attacked the young master yesterday and even sent him flying with a kick. A servant of the Chen estate saw Yang Liuqing and immediately pointed him out. Are there any other witnesses? Assistant Minister Zhao no longer cared about what the woman had just said because the Jing Kingdom did not have a law that forbids kneeling before a trial. It would be disadvantageous for him to pursue the matter, so he could not let her stall for time. Many people saw what happened yesterday. A bailiff nodded slightly and turned around to shout, bring a witness. They saw it. That young master wanted to take liberties with the young lady, but he was beaten up by that heroine. You mean that young master yesterday? He has already looked for that young lady more than 10 times, but he did not even enter the door. That heroine's martial arts are amazing. She sent several grown men flying with one kick. It was really enjoyable to watch. The crowd eating melon seeds did not hide anything and recounted what they had seen with their own eyes yesterday. Both the witness and the evidence are here. What else do you have to say? The assistant minister asked coldly. You could not stand the young master of the Qin family's harassment, so you decided to poison him to death. You had a motive to kill him and it also coincided with the time he was poisoned. What else do you have to say? At the side of the court, the middle-aged man frowned. Although he also wanted to catch the culprit, he had a feeling that the matter was not so simple. Would a mere commoner girl have the guts to poison his son to death? We did have a conflict with him yesterday, but it had nothing to do with the poisoning. The witness and evidence that Sir spoke of have nothing to do with this matter, Yang Liuqing said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. Humph, the evidence is irrefutable and you still want to deny it. It seems that if I don't let you suffer a little, you will not admit it. Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice snorted coldly and said, come, execute them. Xiao Chui's body trembled as she asked in a trembling voice, Miss, what is torture? Zheng Zimo's face paled. Torture was a punishment specially used on women. It was to pierce holes in a wooden stick and connect them with a string. The victim's fingers would be placed in the middle of the stick and the string would be tightened on both sides. This could easily cripple both hands. She relied on her hands to paint and play the guqin. If, thinking of this, she tightened her grip on Xiao Chui's hand. Is it too late? Yang Liuqing looked back and saw that the bailiff had already taken out the instruments of torture. He shook his head slightly and reached into his sleeve. Xiao Chui's face was pale. The moment she saw the instruments of torture, she knew what they were used for. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she still suppressed her fear and stood beside Zheng Zimo. Assistant Minister Zhao stood up from above and said, I will give you one more chance. If you still do not admit to your crimes, don't blame me for being merciless. If you want to incriminate someone, how do you admit to it? Zheng Zumo said through gritted teeth. Use torture. His expression darkened as he threw down a stick. 6 bailiffs walked towards the 3 people. Yang Liuqing sighed softly and took out a piece of silk from his sleeve. Several figures walked out from the outside in a single file. The young man walking at the front looked somewhat thin, and there was a trace of fatigue on his face. However, his voice was powerful and resonant. The Secret Intelligence Bureau is handling a case. Unauthorized personnel, please leave. The bailiff and the 2 officials from the Ministry of Justice were startled when they saw this. Even the bailiffs holding the instruments of torture did not move. Not to mention that they knew this young man, just the clothes that they were wearing were enough to intimidate people. They did not dare to make any strange movements. Louis. Assistant Minister Zhao looked at him with a dark expression and squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.